Hi guys. Tonight we settle in for a slow walk into a very different kind of cold one that creeps into your boots, your breath, and the fragile timber walls you lean against. Imagine yourself stepping out onto the endless prairie at dusk, with the last ribbons of pink light slipping under thick clouds. The horizon is so wide you could almost tip forward into it, but the air is sharp, carrying that unmistakable smell of snow, metallic and dry, as though the earth itself is warning you. You probably won't survive this, not unless you can find or make a place where the blizzards can't reach. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and the time of night in the comments. I'd love to know who's drifting into this story with me. Now, dim the lights. Let the hum of the day fall quiet and breathe a little slower. You're standing on soil that only a few months ago sang with tall grass. Families travelled here with wagons creaking and oxen huffing, chasing a promise of land. But winter is no gentleman. It does not wait until you're ready. By October, the winds blow harder, stripping the trees bare, shaking the loose boards of unfinished cabins. And you, still clutching the reins of your imagination, step closer into the camp of a frontier family. The first mainstream fact is stark. Settlers moving west in the 1800s often underestimated how brutal winters could be. Even seasoned farmers from Europe or the eastern states found themselves shocked at the sheer power of a prairie blizzard, with temperatures plunging below -20 degrees Fahrenheit. They discovered that what looked like a mild snowfall could, within hours, twist into a white wall that erased the landscape. Your ears catch the rattle of a wagon tarp as you imagine what the pioneers carried. Axes, saws, maybe a plough too ambitious for soil still locked in frost. Children clung to dolls stuffed with rags, while mothers carried iron pots and jars of lard. Yet one quirky tidbit slips in here. Some families even packed treasured pianos, dragging them across hundreds of miles of wilderness. You picture the absurd image of a family playing Beethoven, while the wind shrieks at the door, as if culture itself could hold back the storm. Still, there's no delaying the work of shelter. Historians still argue whether the first rush of settlers were reckless dreamers, blinded by land grants and opportunity, or if they truly believed their makeshift shelters would hold up against the season. Either way, you sense their urgency. At sunrise, men with frost on their beards drag logs across the snow, chopping until their hands blister. Women gather what brush they can find, tying it into bundles for kindling. Children scurry after, cheeks red and noses running, doing small chores that keep them from freezing still. Step a little closer in your mind. The earth smells raw where a spade has broken ground. Someone's voice calls out in a mix of exhaustion and hope. Inside the half-built cabin, there's no warmth yet, only the echo of hammer against nail. You brush a hand along the rough bark of a log wall, the surface splintery, sticky with resin. It doesn't feel like much protection, and your shoulders tense with the thought of the first true blizzard crashing down. Pause a moment and feel the silence between gusts of wind. It's heavy, pressing against your chest. Out there, wolves pad quietly, their paws soundless over snow crust. You don't see them yet, but the settlers do, or at least imagine they do. Shadows flicker at the edges of their lamplight. It's enough to quicken your breath. And still, there's something oddly peaceful about this landscape. The sky stretches out like a wool blanket, grey and infinite. The crunch of your boots as you picture walking through the drifts has a sleepy rhythm to it. It's easy to imagine curling up under that heavy sky, letting the storm sweep overhead. The settlers could not afford such calm. They raced against time, working dawn until nightfall, building walls thick enough to trap fire's warmth, roofs angled steeply to shed snow. Every cut of the saw was a prayer against the storm. And as you close your eyes for just a moment, you can almost feel the weight of those prayers on your own shoulders, as if survival itself were a rhythm your body must keep. Tomorrow, those walls may stand taller. The stove may finally breathe smoke through a crude chimney. But for now, you linger in this unfinished moment. caught between the bite of the wind and the fragile hope of shelter not yet proven. You wake again inside this drifting reverie, the sound of snow crunching beneath boots echoing faintly as you move with a frontier family. You smell pine sap clinging to axe handles, and your breath fogs before your face like a small ghost trying to escape. It is time to build more than a dream. A cabin rises, not in an afternoon but stroke by stroke, as hands blister and shoulders ache. You watch as a man swings his axe into a thick tree, bark splintering, chips of wood flying across frosted ground. Each strike feels deliberate, almost musical. Timber is the most valuable treasure in this wild season. Families fanned out, marking trees that could become walls, beams, or roof planks. A mainstream fact often noted: a basic one-room log cabin could be raised by an experienced crew in just a few weeks, though on the open prairies where trees were scarce, this was no small task. Settlers who found groves near rivers considered themselves lucky. Those without them had to haul wood across exhausting miles. You trudge closer, hear the snap as the trunk gives way, crashing into the snow with a hollow thud. Children clap as if it were theatre. The father quickly notches the ends with his axe, shaping the logs so they can lock together like puzzle pieces. A cabin wall is never just stacked, each timber must fit snug, with corners strong enough to resist the push of the wind. You run a hand across the cut, and it feels almost warm, the inner wood pale against the frozen bark. Some families worked together in what was called a raising. Neighbors trudged through drifts to help lift beams, each man grasping an end, each woman providing food to keep spirits from breaking. One quirky tidbit floats in. A few families carved their initials or even hearts into the logs before stacking them, as if romance could live inside walls of sap-stained pine. Imagine lying on the floor at night, the wind screaming, and knowing that behind your head is a little carved heart, a hidden symbol of stubborn hope. Still, historians still debate whether settlers underestimated the demands of timber building. Some argue they should have adopted lighter, quicker methods suited to the prairie's treeless plains. Others counter that the log cabin was more than just shelter. It was a cultural symbol dragged westward, proof of belonging and permanence. Perhaps both views are true. What you sense, standing here among these frozen figures, is urgency mixed with ritual. Every notch in the wood is a declaration: we will survive here. Step further inside your imagined structure. The floor is packed earth, rough under your boots. The walls rise log by log, not straight and tidy like a city house, but slightly uneven, each timber bearing the scars of a hand axe. There is no glass for windows. Openings are small, left rough-edged, waiting to be covered later with greased paper or hides. The roof beams, lifted with groans and shouts, creak as snow begins to settle. Picture the smell: fresh wood mingled with sweat, the iron tang of blood from a cut finger. The air is alive with sound, the rhythm of tools, the calls of children, the muffled lowing of cattle tied nearby. Somewhere, a dog barks at the wind. You almost feel the heat rising from bodies working in rhythm, even though the outside world is sharp with cold. In the corner, a woman kneels beside a small fire. She tends a pot of beans and salted pork, the scent oddly sweet in this barren season. Her hands are cracked, but she hums softly, trying to keep the children calm. A baby wrapped in quilts sleeps nearby, tiny breath fogging the air. You crouch to feel the warmth of the flames, though sparks nip your skin. Already the family is thinking of how to transfer this flame into their cabin once it is finished. Snow flurries swirl through the cracks of half-built walls. You feel them sting your cheek, melting on your eyelashes. Someone yells to hurry. The cabin must have at least 4 walls before nightfall, or the family will freeze in their wagon again. You glance toward that wagon, canvas taut, sagging, not nearly enough to hold back what's coming. You understand why the family works without pause. Another figure arrives, a neighbor with shoulders hunched against the gale. He carries a jug of something sharp-smelling whiskey, perhaps, and offers it as encouragement. You taste it in your imagination, the burn trailing down your throat, a reminder that small mercies helped keep spirits alive. The walls reach shoulder height, then taller, until you crane your neck. They heave logs together, fitting them like giant Lincoln toys, though there is nothing playful here. When one beam slips, crashing into the snow, the sound rings like a warning bell. Time is short, energy thinner with every shiver. You pause and feel the storm gather. The air presses heavier, clouds thickening overhead. The prairie seems to flatten beneath that sky, endless and unforgiving. Imagine yourself lifting the last log, straining as muscles scream, your breath coming in ragged bursts. At last, the cabin stands closed, though crude. The roof will come later, for now a canvas stretched across beams. But tonight, at least, the family will sleep inside 4 timbered walls. Step across the threshold in your mind. The cabin smells of pine and mud, of human breath and hope. The floor crunches with stray snow dragged in by boots. A lantern flickers on a crude shelf, casting shadows that make the logs seem alive. You trace the seams where light glimmers through. Tomorrow, they will be chinked with moss, clay, or old rags. Tonight, they remain open, and you feel the draft snake across your ankles. Still, there is comfort. The fire, now transplanted into a hearth built of stones gathered from the field, pops with resin. Sparks leap up the chimney gap, tracing into the night sky. You feel warmth radiate across your hands. A dog curls near the hearth, its body steaming faintly from melted snow. The family exhales in unison, a single sigh of survival. You lean against the wall, listening to the storm build outside. The logs creak, but they hold. Snow hisses against the roof canvas. Somewhere in the dark, wolves pad silently, their howls carried faintly across the plains. Inside, you share the strange comfort of thin walls, the knowledge that danger is just beyond reach, yet not quite inside. Close your eyes now. Picture the cabin standing alone, a fragile box of timber on an ocean of snow. Its lamplight glows faint through cracks, a faint yellow pulse in the white wilderness. The wind batters, but for tonight, you are safe. You step softly forward, your boots crunching again on frozen ground. Ahead, the timber cabin fades into memory, and now you notice something stranger rising from the prairie. It looks less like a house and more like a mound of earth, a low hill disguised as part of the landscape. As you walk closer, you realize families dug straight into the soil itself to make shelter. The sod house, heavy, earthen, and unglamorous, was the refuge of countless frontier settlers. Imagine taking the very skin of the prairie and turning it into walls. Settlers cut thick rectangles of sod, each about the size of a loaf of bread, their roots and grasses still tangled. They stacked them like bricks, one upon another, until a wall grew waist-high, then taller, until it enclosed a room. It was crude, but here's a mainstream fact worth remembering. By the 1872, sod houses were the most common dwelling on the treeless plains of Nebraska and Kansas. They were quick to build, sturdy against wind, and surprisingly warm once snow began to pack against their sides. You crouch down to touch one of these sod bricks in your mind. It's damp, smelling of grass and loam, like a meadow torn up and reassembled indoors. As you press your hand, soil crumbles onto your palm, leaving a dark stain. Families discovered that in winter, this dirt wall could hold heat better than wood, like an earthen quilt wrapped around the body. Still, the work was grueling. Cutting sod meant hours of back-breaking labor, lifting each block with a spade, dragging it across the ground. The edges weren't neat, roots dangled, insects clung. One quirky tidbit: some settlers complained that snakes would slither right out of the sod walls in spring, warming themselves near the hearth. Imagine lying half asleep under a patched quilt and spotting a curious snake poking its head from your wall surprise housemate. And yet, historians still argue whether sod houses truly kept families safe or merely prolonged their suffering. Some describe them as ingenious, proof of human adaptation. Others call them little more than burrows, damp and pest-ridden, symbolic of desperation. Perhaps both are true. You feel this tension as you stand in the dim interior of one now, a lamp flickering against brown walls that seem to breathe with the shifting soil. Step closer in. The ceiling is low, supported by timbers dragged from far away or improvised from wagon parts. Sometimes even prairie grass itself was woven across for a roof. You can smell the mustiness, the sharp tang of damp earth. When snow falls thick above, you hear it pressing, muffled thumps on the roof that feel heavy against your chest. It's not silence, it's the weight of nature reminding you it's there. Inside, the floor is also dirt, swept smooth but never quite clean. You feel it cool beneath your soles, and moisture seeps upward, leaving patches damp. Buckets sit against the wall to catch leaks from snowmelt dripping through the roof. Children shuffle in their patched socks, leaving trails of muddy prints that never quite fade. Yet, despite the gloom, families made these dugouts into homes. Quilts hung from the walls added color. Shelves built from spare planks held precious tins of flour and jars of preserves. And the sound you listen now to the dull crackle of a fire in a crude stove, its iron glowing orange, throwing heat that warms one side of you while the other side stays cold. The smoke curls lazily, too sluggish to leave, and the air is heavy, pressing on your lungs. Imagine the nights here, wind screaming outside, wolves prowling unseen, but within these soil walls, sound softens. It feels almost like being underground, hidden away from the world. Perhaps you even sense the calm of hibernation, like a bear in its den. Families lay close together on bedding made of straw and patched quilts, bodies pressed for warmth. You feel the scratch of straw against your cheek, the weight of another's breath beside you. Still, hardship lingers in every breath. The damp air clings to your clothes, leaving them mouldy if left unwatched. Insects, spiders, beetles wander in from the sod. And when heavy storms came, roofs collapsed under the weight of snow, burying families in an instant. You hear the imagined crash, the sudden choke of dust, and the frantic scramble to dig free. The prairie gives, but it also takes back. Step outside again in your mind, blinking against the blizzard's brightness. From a distance, sod houses vanish into the prairie low, earthen humps with smoke trailing upward. They looked so much a part of the land that travelers often missed them entirely. One account describes a traveler nearly riding his horse straight onto a sod roof, unaware that a family sat eating supper beneath. That image lingers, the fragility of life separated from hooves and storm only by a layer of dirt and faith. Pause. Let the wind rush past your ears. Hear the low whistle as it cuts across the endless plains. You smell snow in the air again, metallic and dry, mingling with the scent of earth rising from the sod walls. There's something both humbling and claustrophobic about it. You realize that on this frontier, the very ground you walk on can become your roof, your walls, your last line of defense against the storm. And still, despite all of this, families laughed here. They sang hymns, told stories, played fiddles if one had survived the journey. A dog curled in the corner, children giggled under patched quilts, and a woman stirred stew in an iron pot, steam fogging the earthen ceiling. You feel the warmth of that moment, life blooming inside soil, fragile but stubborn. It is almost a paradox, isn't it? Something so temporary, so crude, yet it became the stage for memories, births, and even weddings. You imagine candles flickering against sod walls as a couple exchanged vows, snow drifting outside. The storm held at bay for just a moment. And as you let that thought linger, the walls around you blur. The sod dissolves into shadow. The hum of the storm softens. You are left with the echo of breath, the weight of damp air, and the faint comfort of being hidden underground while the blizzard rages above. The storm has gathered strength, and you feel the prairie tilt into a harsher rhythm. The log cabins and sod dugouts you've glimpsed now blur behind the falling snow. What comes into focus next is far more fragile. Canvas stretched across poles, the temporary tents that too many families still relied on when the first true blizzards arrived. You step closer, your boots sinking deep. The canvas flaps in the gale like the wings of a frightened bird. Someone has tied ropes to stakes driven into frozen soil, but the wind pulls at them, stretching fabric until the seams groan. Inside, the space is cramped, with walls thin enough that you can hear every whistle of air outside. One well-documented reality of frontier life was that newcomers often reached their land too late in the year to build permanent homes. They set up canvas tents, wagon covers, or makeshift lean-tos, thinking they would last until spring. But the prairie offered no mercy. When temperatures plunged and snow came in sheets, those thin fabrics were little more than paper against the storm. You duck under the flap in your imagination and feel the chill. The air inside is barely warmer than the air outside. Children huddle in blankets, their breath rising in pale clouds that cling to the roof and drip back down as icy water. Someone tries to heat the space with a small fire, but sparks nearly catch the fabric. You smell smoke mixing with damp cloth and realize how quickly hope could vanish if flames spread. Curiously enough, families sometimes insulated their tents by piling snow against the sides, hoping the drifts would serve as walls. Imagine the irony, using the very storm you fear to help you survive it. Snow pressed tight might trap heat, but it also made escape harder if winds tore through or fire caught. Yet desperation teaches odd lessons, and the settlers learned them in long, sleepless nights. There's ongoing debate among scholars about whether pioneers who relied on tents were reckless or simply unprepared victims of timing. Some accounts describe families arriving late in autumn, with daylight too short to raise cabins. Others suggest overconfidence, that settlers underestimated the ferocity of plains winters, believing their eastern camping skills would suffice. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between optimism and miscalculation. Picture the sound now. The wind lashes the canvas until it snaps like a whip. The poles groan and shift in their sockets, snow piling against one side until it threatens to cave in. Every gust rattles the pegs, and you imagine the sickening moment when one gives way. The whole structure shudders, and for a heartbeat you fear it will collapse on the shivering family inside. You sit with them, your knees brushing damp ground. The earth beneath is frozen solid, but water pools on the surface, seeping into bedding. Quilts lie heavy with dampness, smelling of mildew. The air is filled with the rasp of coughing, the sharp cries of children who cannot sleep. A kettle rattles on a crude iron trivet, its steam curling weakly before fading into the chill. Still, there are moments of stubborn humanity here. Someone reaches for a fiddle, drawing out slow notes that rise above the storm. The sound is thin but sweet, and for a few minutes the tent becomes a cocoon of melody. You lean your head back, eyes closed, letting the music soften the roar of wind, if only for a heartbeat. An odd anecdote survives. Some families kept livestock just outside the tent walls, tying horses or cows nearby, so their body heat might drift inward. The smell was pungent, but warmth was warmth. Imagine drifting to sleep listening to a horse breathing just beyond the fabric, your survival tied literally to its breath. The canvas sags lower as snow builds heavier. Inside, conversation grows quiet. Everyone is listening, the parents, the children, even you, to the relentless push of nature. The prairie outside is blank, erased by white, but in here it is claustrophobic, a cage made of flapping cloth. You run your hand over the fabric and feel it tremble like a living thing. Some experts insist that these makeshift shelters were symbolic of courage, settlers choosing to endure the unendurable. Others argue they reveal only desperation, mistakes dressed up as bravery. You breathe in this tension, tasting both pride and regret in the damp air. When the storm's peak arrives, you feel the whole tent sway. Snow drives in through seams, stinging your cheeks, melting into icy streaks. Children whimper, mothers shush, fathers brace poles with their shoulders. You imagine yourself doing the same, your back pressed to a shaking beam, praying it will hold until morning. The night stretches long. Sleep comes only in fragments. each one shattered by the tent snapping overhead. At last, a grey light seeps through the fabric. The storm eases, leaving drifts piled like walls around the camp. You crawl out into the brittle air, blinking at a landscape transformed into an endless desert of white dunes. The tent behind you looks pitiful, sagging, frayed, yet somehow still upright. You exhale slowly, feeling the exhaustion of the family who lived through it. The lesson is clear. Canvas was never meant to fight a blizzard. But it carried them through this night. And sometimes, one night was all you needed to reach the next step in survival. As you step back, snow crunching beneath you, the tent fades behind the veil of falling flakes. The prairie stretches endless, demanding more than fabric, demanding walls of wood, earth, and determination. And so you move forward, toward the next shelter the settlers carved against the cold. The air is sharp tonight, a whetted blade slicing across your skin as you approach the crude log walls once more. This time you pay closer attention, tracing with your imagination the tiny seams where icy wind snakes through. Even a thick log cabin could betray its builders if the gaps between timbers weren't sealed properly. You find yourself standing shoulder to shoulder with a frontier mother, mud-stained apron pulled tight, as she stoops with a bucket and a small child at her side. Together, they press handfuls of material into the cracks, determined to banish the drafts. One undeniable aspect of frontier construction was the practice of chinking. The gaps between stacked logs were rarely snug enough to stop air, so families filled them with whatever was at hand. Clay, mud, straw, moss, even strips of worn clothing, all were stuffed into crevices, sometimes reinforced with sticks. Without this step, the structure became little more than a sieve, letting cold rush in and precious heat flee. Imagine trying to keep a fire burning all night, while the wind whistled through dozens of tiny slits around you. Chinking meant survival, pure and simple. You crouch down in the half-lit cabin, the dirt floor cool beneath your knees. Your fingers sink into a mixture of mud and moss, sticky and cold. You smear it into the gap between two logs, watching as the darkness disappears, replaced by the dull brown patch. The smell is earthy, sharp, like wet ground after a storm. The children giggle as they dab mud on their noses, turning a chore into a fleeting game. Stranger accounts mention how some families, short on resources, stuffed rags or even pages torn from hymnals and newspapers into the spaces. Imagine reading yesterday's headlines plastered against your wall, the ink smudging when touched by frost. It's an odd intimacy, words meant for public eyes pressed into the private cracks of your home, a thin paper shield against the roar of winter. Researchers still puzzle over how effective these varied chinking materials really were. Clay hardened but cracked under constant freeze-thaw cycles. Moss held moisture and sometimes rotted. Old cloth might do for a week but fell apart when gnawed by mice. Yet families swore by their chosen methods, arguing passionately in letters and diaries. Was it science or simply the comfort of believing you'd done anything to keep the cold at bay? You tilt your head and listen. The storm outside hasn't ceased, but the whistling is softer now, muffled by the freshly packed seams. You run your hand along the wall and feel only the faintest tremor of wind. There's relief in that sensation, as though the house itself exhales, content to keep its warmth a little longer. Still, the work never ended. Each morning, settlers checked the walls, patching where the mud had crumbled overnight or where snow had melted and seeped in. You can almost see them circling the cabin with buckets of clay, boots crunching over frost, steam rising from their breath. In this daily ritual lay both frustration and reassurance. Sealing the house again and again was a reminder of fragility, but also of control. Inside, the light is dim but golden. A lantern swings gently, shadows stretching like fingers across the patched walls. The chinked seams stand out, irregular and rough, but they also tell a story of care. Every filled gap is a mark of someone's hands, a gesture of defiance against the winter. You glance toward the stove, hear the iron ping as it expands with heat, and notice how the room feels warmer than it should. The small efforts are working. You lean closer to the wall, nose nearly touching the damp clay. The smell of earth is strong, mixed with smoke from the stove. In the faint light you can see strands of straw poking out, little whiskers that quiver when wind presses against the outside. For a moment, you imagine the cabin itself is alive, shivering but determined, held together by human stubbornness and handfuls of mud. Curiously, a few families even experimented with plastering walls inside and out, using a slurry of lime and sand if they could obtain it. It was rare on the frontier, but those who managed claimed their cabins stayed far warmer. You picture the bright white plaster shining inside a one-room cabin, reflecting lamplight so strongly that nights felt shorter, brighter, almost civilized. But the expense was too high for most, so the majority settled for mud that cracked and moss that molded. Some historians argue these rough homes, patched with earth and rags, embodied the settlers' resilience. Others see them as proof of neglect from distant governments that encouraged migration without providing adequate support. You let that debate roll in your mind as you study the patched seams. Whichever view you take, the truth is clear. Without these clumsy layers pressed between logs, many families would not have lived to see spring. Outside, the wind howls again, testing the defenses. You sit quietly, listening to the muffled roar. Snow taps against the chinked walls, but the air inside remains steady, warmer than you expected. A child curls against your side, blanket tucked tight, whispering about the sound the storm makes like wolves circling, like ghosts brushing past. You stroke their hair, whispering back that the walls will hold, and you almost believe it yourself. Hours later, dawn slips in, pale and thin. You peer out a small opening and see drifts piled high against the logs, sealing them further. The sun's rays sparkle on snow crust, but the air remains bitter. Behind you, the patched walls stand firm, mud drying in strange patterns, rags bulging slightly. Not beautiful, not perfect, but functional. The family stirs, stretching stiff limbs, ready to repeat the work again. Take one last look at the wall. Each uneven seam is a scar, a reminder of the struggle waged nightly between warmth and frost. In the end, survival is not about elegance, it is about hands pressed into cold mud, voices raised in determination, and the belief that even the smallest effort can hold back the endless storm. The storm lingers outside, but inside the cabin another element takes center stage: fire and iron. You step toward the stove, hear the low hum of burning wood, and feel warmth creep into your fingertips. This simple black box is no luxury. It is the beating heart of survival. Without it, the walls patched with mud and straw would still bleed cold. With it, families could pretend, if only briefly, that the blizzard could be tamed. One well-attested reality of frontier winters is that iron stoves revolutionized home life. Before their spread in the mid-1800s, open fireplaces were common, but they wasted fuel and bled heat up the chimney. The box stove, with its door, chimney pipe, and flat top for cooking, allowed settlers to stretch every stick of wood, every coal, every handful of dried buffalo chips. In diaries, pioneers marveled at how a small load of kindling could warm an entire one-room house. You lean close, palm hovering above the top, and feel the steady pulse of heat radiating outward. And yet, curiously enough, that same lifeline carried risks. Chimneys often smoked poorly when cobbled together from mud and stones. Rooms filled with a haze that stung eyes and throats, leaving walls dark with soot. Imagine lying under a quilt, drifting towards sleep, and waking with your lungs raw from breathing smoke all night. Some settlers even joked darkly that smoke alone might kill them before the storm outside had a chance. The debate among researchers continues on just how safe these stoves were. Some argue they represented a triumph of adaptation, a technology that let frontier families stretch scarce resources. Others emphasize their hazards: the frequent chimney fires, the children burned by glowing iron, the silent poisoning when vents clogged. You shift your weight, hearing the stove pop as resin in the wood bursts, and consider both sides of that scholarly argument. Safety and survival rarely march together here. Compromise was the rule. Step closer in. The smell is thick pine sap crackling, resin releasing a sweet, sharp scent that clings to your clothes. Smoke curls lazily from the pipe, leaving a faint metallic tang. You hear the crack and settle of logs as they collapse inward, orange embers glowing like tiny suns. A kettle rattles softly on top, steam whispering from its spout, filling the room with the scent of dried herbs steeping in hot water. Families often gathered around this little iron hearth not only for heat, but for companionship. You see them now, circling close. Children sprawled on rag rugs, parents drawing chairs nearer, a dog curled so close that its fur nearly singes, voices lower to murmurs, as though the stove itself demands reverence. The storm may shriek at the walls, but here at the center, there is a pool of warmth and light. An odd anecdote emerges from settler journals. Some households dried laundry by hanging it directly above the stove, filling the cabin with the smell of damp wool and soap. At night, when clothing steamed and hissed in the heat, families joked that they were living inside a giant soup kettle. Imagine lying under your blanket, hearing your shirt sizzle faintly overhead, knowing at least you'd have something warm to pull on in the morning. The stove doubled as a kitchen, of course. You picture bread baked on iron plates, beans simmering in a pot, bacon hissing as fat dripped and smoked. The smell is rich, comforting, yet slightly acrid. Food took on the taste of smoke, and though settlers grew tired of it, you would gladly swallow those smoky morsels now, grateful for any warmth in your belly. Still, hazards never left. Sparks leapt from the open door, sometimes igniting rugs or straw bedding. Children bore scars from leaning too close, their skin blistered where iron kissed flesh. There are letters describing mothers holding infants back, warning again and again, yet accidents happened. A small tragedy could unfold in seconds, the kind that left a family shaken for years. Some experts argue that despite the dangers, stoves created a psychological anchor proof that humans could carve a sphere of comfort even on a hostile plane. Others stress how fragile that illusion was, noting how one clog in the chimney or one falling ember could undo everything. You stand in the center of the cabin now, feeling both truths at once. Soot in your lungs, warmth on your hands, survival balanced precariously on glowing coals. The noises wrap around you, wood popping, the faint hiss of sap, a child humming softly. Outside, the wind throws handfuls of snow against the roof, but the sound is muted here. The stove has become its own weather system, a tiny sun in a frozen universe. You close your eyes and let the heat seep deeper until your shoulders unclench. But the comfort doesn't erase exhaustion. Someone must feed the fire, rising in the dark hours, stumbling with half-frozen logs to keep the embers alive. Picture yourself waking at midnight, fumbling to stir the ashes, your breath fogging in the cold air that creeps back the moment flames falter. You stuff wood into the stove, hear it roar weakly to life, and know you've won only a temporary reprieve. Oddly, even in this hardship, there were moments of almost comic absurdity. Some families reported cooking everything from bread to coffee to soap on the same stovetop. The smells mingled together, so breakfast might taste faintly of lye, or stew might carry a whiff of laundry soap. You wrinkle your nose, smiling faintly despite yourself, imagining such peculiar meals shared around the table. As the night drags on, the stove glows red, throwing long shadows across the log walls. Children sleep tangled in quilts, their cheeks flushed with heat. Adults sit quietly, staring into the small window of fire through the iron grate, thoughts wandering as steadily as the flames. You join them in silence, hypnotized by the dance of light and shadow. When morning comes, frost clings thick to the windows, but inside it is survivable. You stretch stiff muscles, smell yesterday's smoke in your hair, and hear the crackle of one last ember sighing in the ashes. The stove has done its work, it has held the night at bay. Step back from it now in your imagination. See the cabin as a whole. Smoke trailing gently into the pale sky. A fragile column marking human resistance on an endless plain of snow. For all its hazards, the iron stove remains the difference between life and death, between frost-bitten silence and one more dawn. And you, along with the family huddled close, have survived to face the storm again. The stove still glows faintly behind you, but tonight your attention lifts upward to the creaking structure overhead. A roof on the frontier was never just a lid, it was a gamble. Too light, and the snow pressed it down until the whole cabin caved in. Too heavy, and the timbers cracked under their own strain. You stand inside as the storm rages, watching flakes sift through a gap and melt into tiny drops on the dirt floor. The roof is the cabin's most fragile promise. One well-documented detail from frontier architecture is that settlers used whatever roofing materials they could secure. Overlapping shingles split from logs, bark stripped from trees, prairie grasses tied into bundles, or sod itself piled thick above rafters. Each choice had consequences. Wood shingles shed water better, but they demanded precious timber. Grass thatch was lighter, but rodents nested there, scratching all night above sleeping heads. Sod roofs insulated, but sagged dangerously under heavy snow. You look upward and see all of these risks in your mind, the roof groaning as if it knows its own weakness. Curiously enough, there are stories of children clambering onto those very roofs to shovel snow off, their small figures almost swallowed by the white landscape. Picture them stumbling along the peak with crude shovels, parents shouting from below, the wind threatening to knock them down. It was absurd and terrifying, but also necessary. Without that effort, the weight of a single storm could collapse the home entirely. Among historians, disagreement lingers about which roofing method proved most successful. Some argue sod roofs offered the best insulation and held heat well into the night. Others insist wood shingles, though harder to obtain, were sturdier and safer in the long run. What no one disputes is the constant anxiety these roofs produced. You feel it now in your chest. The creak of timber above, the shifting sigh of snow, the sense that survival hangs by beams and nails that may not hold. Step closer in your imagination. You place your hand on a supporting post and feel it shiver faintly under the load. Outside, snow falls heavier, a steady hush like sand pouring onto cloth. The roof darkens under the weight, groaning, sometimes cracking loud enough to wake the whole family in the night. You smell damp bark and mold, the earthy aroma of sod overhead. Every drop that leaks through lands on bedding, spreading into dark stains that steam faintly near the stove. The soundscape is relentless. Drips patter into tin cups placed on the floor to catch them. Wind whistles through gaps where shingles overlap imperfectly. Mice scurry in the thatch above, their nails clicking softly. All of it creates a restless chorus, reminding you every moment that the storm owns the land, and your roof is nothing but a borrowed shield. An odd anecdote appears from settler letters. Families sometimes decorated their roofs with lines of stones or even old wagon wheels, hoping to keep shingles from blowing away. Imagine glancing up to see the outline of a wagon wheel, silhouetted against the pale sky, not as a symbol of travel anymore, but as ballast holding down the very top of your world. And still, even with such measures, collapse was common. Diaries tell of sudden crashes, whole sections giving way under snow or ice, families scrambling to drag bedding out before it was ruined. You hear that imagined thunder now, the split and crash, dust and snow bursting into the room. Hearts hammer, children cry, adults shout orders as they prop beams with whatever they can find, chairs, barrels, their own shoulders. The fear lingers long after the roof is patched, every creak a reminder of how thin the margin of safety is. Some scholars interpret these fragile roofs as metaphors for the settlers' lives, strong enough to endure, but only barely, dependent on constant vigilance. Others view them as lessons in compromise, showing how humans bend to whatever materials nature offers. You stand in the middle of that debate, listening to the roof sigh, recognizing that both views hold truth. Yet even in this precarious shelter, people found ways to carve out comfort. Imagine lying beneath that sagging roof, wrapped in quilts, listening to the fire crackle. Rain or snow drips softly into a bucket beside you, but you lull yourself to sleep with its rhythm, like a rustic lullaby. Sometimes small tragedies became ordinary sounds, leaks, drips, rodents, until the unusual turned strangely soothing. Step outside with me in your mind. Look back at the cabin, its roof hunched under thick white drifts, smoke trailing from the chimney. It seems fragile, yes, but also defiant. Against a horizon erased by storm, it stands as a stubborn black mark. Here we endure. You brush snow from your shoulders and imagine the weight that presses not just on timbers, but on every heart inside. And still, somehow, the walls hold, the roof holds, and dawn will come again. For now, you return indoors, sink to the dirt floor, and close your eyes to the slow percussion of drips and groans. The roof trembles, but it does not fall. Not tonight. The roof above groans but holds, and now your eyes drift to the rough rectangle cut into one wall. It isn't glass that greets you there. Glass is far too dear and heavy to haul across hundreds of miles of prairie. Instead, light filters through a thin, waxy film stretched taut across the opening. You lean closer, nose almost against it, and notice how the world outside blurs into shifting grey. One often recorded reality of frontier cabins is that many windows were nothing more than holes covered with greased paper or animal hide. The settlers, ingenious and desperate, coated sheets of paper with lard or bare grease until they became translucent, letting in a dull glow while blocking the fiercest drafts. You press your hand to the film and feel its tacky texture, faintly oily, as if it might crumble beneath your touch. Yet it serves its purpose without it. The opening would be only another mouth for the wind to roar through. Curiously enough, children sometimes drew little pictures on those paper panes before they were greased, so the family could enjoy faint outlines of birds, flowers, or even words glowing faintly when the sun shone through. Imagine sitting in a one-room cabin in the middle of a howling storm, your only view of the outside world a blurred sketch of a bird, wings forever spread in oily translucence. A fragile piece of beauty pressed into a wall of mud and timber. Scholars continue to disagree on how effective these coverings were. Some suggest they offered surprising insulation, especially when paired with shutters closed tight at night. Others point out their flaws. Paper grew brittle, grease attracted dirt, and hides stiffened and cracked in the cold. As you stand in the half-light now, you feel that tension. A fragile barrier, protective yet flawed, letting in just enough brightness to remind you that the world outside still exists. Step closer still. The paper smells faintly of smoke and animal fat, mingled with the ever-present musk of damp logs. You watch as frost creeps along its edges, delicate feathers of ice spreading in silence. The window seems alive, its surface breathing with every gust outside. When the wind presses hard, the sheet flexes inward like a drum, trembling as if about to split. You hold your breath, waiting, but somehow it does not give way. The view it grants is strange, neither clear nor opaque. Outside, shapes blur. The ghostly white of snowdrifts, the dark blur of trees bending in the gale, the faint shadow of a figure moving to gather wood. You cannot tell if it is neighbor, stranger, or memory, only that the world is there, beyond reach. It is both comforting and lonely, like hearing voices through a wall. An odd anecdote survives in letters. Settlers sometimes pasted multiple layers of paper for strength, overlapping sheets from old hymnals, seed catalogues, or school primers. Imagine the odd mosaic that resulted: snippets of scripture glowing beside seed prices, fragments of arithmetic tables shining faintly with the morning Sunday. A child learning numbers by candlelight could glance up and see them glowing right from the window pane. Inside, the family treats the window with reverence. Children are warned not to press against it, lest it tear. At night, shutters, rough boards hinged with leather swing shut to block the cold. The cabin plunges into darkness then, the only light from the stove or lanterns. You feel the shift, the hush when the shutters close, as though the house itself blinks its eyes shut to sleep. Some historians suggest that these paper-covered windows carried symbolic weight, a thin connection to the outside world, enough to stave off total isolation. Others counter that they were poor compromises, proof of just how cut off these families were. You sense both truths now. The paper window lets in light, but not clarity. It offers the illusion of openness, while reminding you that you are sealed away from everything beyond. The soundscape changes here. Snow pelts the paper with a faint patter, softer than the sharp rattle against wood. When wind pushes hard, the pane buzzes faintly, a low hum that seeps into your bones. The children murmur, half asleep, while a mother dabs a crack with more grease, sealing the leak before frost invades. You smell the fat as it warms faintly under her touch, pungent and earthy, blending with smoke from the stove. Still, there are moments of beauty. On rare sunny mornings, the whole cabin glows softly, as if lit from within. The greased paper catches the light, diffusing it into a golden haze. Dust motes swirl lazily in the beam, and for a few blessed hours the space feels almost warm, almost cheerful. You sit by the wall, close your eyes, and imagine that the storm has ended, though you know it hasn't. Oddly, when settlers later wrote of these paper windows, many did so with a kind of nostalgia. Glass eventually replaced them, but the memory of blurred light and greasy texture lingered, perhaps because it symbolized the raw invention of those desperate winters, or perhaps because hardship often turns into cherished story when retold by survivors. You lean back now, away from the fragile pane. The cabin darkens again as clouds swallow the Sunday. The storm's voice returns louder, wind shrieking, snow scraping against the walls. But still the paper holds, trembling but unbroken, like the families inside. As night gathers, shutters close, the last glow fades, and you sit in darkness lit only by a stove's sigh. Outside remains a mystery, sealed away by paper, grease, and wood. Inside, though, the air is warmer, the family closer, and the storm, though unyielding, cannot erase the small light that lingers here. The greased paper panes fade into shadow, and now you descend, step by cautious step, into the earth itself. Some shelters were not built above the ground at all, but carved straight into it. Imagine stooping low, boots slipping on a slope of frozen dirt, as you enter a dugout, a home half hidden beneath the prairie. The air changes immediately, heavy, damp, and close. You draw a slow breath, taste clay on your tongue, and hear your own exhale echo against earthen walls. One well-noted truth of frontier settlement is that when lumber was scarce or time too short, families dug into the banks of streams or hillsides to create instant homes. Known as dugouts, or sometimes cellar houses, these shelters could be scraped out in days, needing little more than spades, muscle, and desperation. It was not elegance they sought, but immediacy. Against the prairie wind, even a hole in the ground was better than a wagon or a tent. Stranger accounts reveal the creatures that shared these quarters. In spring, snakes, frogs, and even field mice wandered through, finding the damp soil walls as inviting as humans did. One mother wrote of her children naming the frogs that hopped along the hearth at night, as though they were uninvited but tolerated neighbors. Imagine tucking yourself into bed, while a frog croaks from a crack in the wall, its voice echoing oddly in the enclosed chamber. Experts remain divided on whether dugouts truly protected families or merely traded one danger for another. Some argue they kept wind and snow at bay, insulating with the thick weight of soil. Others point to the mold, the flooding, and the collapse of roofs when rain soaked the earth. Standing here, the dirt smell clinging to your hair, you feel that ambivalence. The dugout is both refuge and trap. Your eyes adjust to the dim. The ceiling is low, propped with rough beams salvaged from wagons or scavenged timbers. Moisture drips down in steady beads, plinking into buckets placed carefully underneath. The floor squelches faintly beneath your step, mud sucking at your boots. The air is thick, humid even in winter, as though the house itself sweats under the strain of holding together. Listen carefully. The wind outside is muffled, a dull moan filtered through layers of soil. Inside, other sounds emerge, the soft scurry of mice in the walls, the creak of beams shifting with pressure, the occasional thud as a clod of dirt loosens and falls. A child coughs, the sound amplified by the close space. You smell smoke from a stovepipe that juts crookedly through the roof of earth, its draft poor, its fumes lingering. Yet families made these burrows livable. Quilts were hung to cover the raw walls, bright scraps of colour against mud. A small shelf held jars of dried apples, the sweet scent cutting through dampness. A dog lies at the entrance, fur matted with mud, its ears twitching at every drip and creak. The children play with sticks on the floor, their laughter echoing strangely, hollow and deep. For a moment, even here, life feels ordinary. One curious tidbit: dugouts were often so dark that families marked time by the sound of roosters rather than light, since dawn could not reach inside. Imagine waking not to sunlight but to muffled crowing outside, then lighting a lantern to chase back the eternal twilight of your underground home. You reach out and touch the wall. The soil is cool, crumbling under your fingertips, leaving grit on your skin. When the stove warms, condensation beads on the surface, dripping onto your wrist. It feels alive, as though the earth breathes with you. The sensation is unsettling, intimate, and you wonder how settlers managed months of it without losing their minds. Scholars debate whether these dugouts represented ingenuity or failure. Were they clever adaptations to a treeless land, or signs that the settlers had pushed into territory unfit for habitation? Letters reveal both pride and shame. Some families boasted of their snug burrows, while others wrote apologetically, calling them temporary dens, until real homes could be built. You stand in that tension now, unable to decide whether to admire or pity the effort. Night falls, though you can barely tell. Candles sputter against the damp, their flames hissing as wax meets stray drops of water. The air grows heavier, pressing down on your chest. Families sleep close, breaths mingling in the narrow space. You curl under a quilt, smell earth in the fabric, and hear water drip into the bucket at steady intervals, tick, 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 the sound of time itself measured by leaks. Then comes the storm. Snow falls thick outside, but you barely hear it. What you notice instead is the shifting groan of soil above, the faint rain of dirt onto your blanket. The children whimper. Parents whisper reassurances. You press your hand to the wall and feel it tremble, as if the earth itself sighs. Every second stretches long, suspenseful, until finally the weight eases, the dugout holds. Relief washes over like warm water, though you know it is only for tonight. At dawn you crawl out into the pale world. The dugout entrance is half buried by drifted snow, and you must push hard to break free. The cold air rushes in, stinging after the damp closeness below. You look back and see nothing but a dark hole in the hill, smoke curling faintly upward. To an outsider, it might seem like an animal's den, but you know it was a house, a sanctuary, a fragile victory over the storm. The dugout remains behind you, damp and dark, a symbol of both human will and human vulnerability. You carry its smell in your clothes, its closeness in your lungs, and you step forward into the storm again, grateful and weary. You climb out of the damp dugout in your imagination, brushing soil from your sleeves, only to find yourself pulled toward another sound, lowing, stamping, the shiver of hooves against packed snow. The storm thickens, yet faint lantern light flickers from a larger structure nearby. You push open a heavy door, its hinges groaning, and step into the barn. Warmth hits you immediately, not from fire this time, but from breath, the steaming exhalations of animals huddled together. One widely observed pattern on the frontier was that barns and stables sometimes doubled as human shelters when blizzards turned deadly. If a family's cabin was unfinished, damaged, or simply too cold, they carried bedding into the barn and lived alongside their livestock. Horses, cows, pigs, and chickens all produced body heat, turning the space into a crude but life-saving refuge. You breathe in, the air thick with hay, manure, and the sweet tang of animal sweat, and realize this odor was the smell of survival. Curiously, diaries describe children treating the animals as housemates during those nights. Cows were given nicknames, hens were coaxed to roost near beds, and horses became silent guardians, their great bodies radiating warmth. Imagine lying under a quilt with your ear pressed to the side of a cow, hearing its steady rumble of digestion as a lullaby while the storm claws at the roof. It is absurd, yet strangely tender. There is still disagreement among historians about how common this practice really was. Some argue it was rare, only used in emergencies, while others suggest it happened more frequently than people admitted, out of necessity rather than choice. Shame and practicality often collided in these recollections. Was sleeping with your animals a mark of failure or an ingenious use of shared resources? You sit on a wooden beam now, the smell clinging to your clothes, and feel both sides of the argument pressing in. Look around carefully. The barn is dim, lit by a single lantern hung from a nail. The light sways, casting long shadows over the animals' flanks. Steam rises in clouds with every exhale, the air damp but warm. Chickens rustle in their straw, clucking softly even in darkness. A horse stamps its hooves, the sound echoing like a drum. You stretch out your hands and feel the moist heat rising, different from the dry warmth of a stove, but steady, reliable. The soundscape here is rich and alive, the rhythmic chewing of cattle, the flutter of wings as a hen adjusts her perch, the soft whine of a dog circling at your feet. All of it drowns out the storm outside, replacing terror with a rustic symphony of life. You almost forget the blizzard for a moment, lulled by the pulse of animals breathing in unison. An unusual detail emerges in settler letters. Families sometimes milked cows at night during storms simply for the comfort of the act, not just for sustenance. Warm milk fresh from the udder was a rare luxury, filling tin cups with steaming nourishment when all else was frozen. Picture yourself cradling such a cup now, the smell faintly sweet, the liquid warming your palms while the blizzard shrieks unheard beyond the barn walls. Still, discomfort never left. Floors were layered with straw, but manure built up quickly, the stench overwhelming. Families covered their noses with rags, yet still woke coughing. Dust and feathers filled the air. Bedding became soiled within hours, and the constant danger lingered. If disease spread among livestock, humans living so close risked catching it too. You shift uncomfortably, imagining the weight of that risk, yet understanding why families made the choice. Some researchers view these shared barns as moments of blurred boundaries, human and animal survival, entwined in ways rarely acknowledged today. Others dismiss them as temporary acts of desperation, hardly worth romanticizing. Yet sitting here on the straw, leaning against a cow's flank, you sense a peculiar intimacy. Survival is not solitary. It is shared breath, shared warmth, shared life. You notice the details now. A child strokes a horse's mane, whispering secrets into its ear. A mother gathers eggs by lantern light, the shells still warm. A father sharpens a knife, preparing feed for the animals, his motions slow but steady. The dog curls at the family's feet, ears twitching, half asleep but alert. Every gesture is small, ordinary, yet woven together they create a sense of fragile peace. One odd anecdote lingers from a pioneer's memoir. He claimed his family once relied on the heat of pigs to keep newborn twins alive through a brutal January night. The pigs lay in straw, snuffling contentedly, while the infants slept nearby, their blankets warmed by animal breath. Absurd? Yes. But in that moment, it was also genius. You feel the strange tenderness of such a scene, equal parts comic and sacred. The storm outside grows wilder. You hear the barn roof groan, snow sliding down its slanted sides. wind rattling loose boards. Animals startle, shifting nervously, but the walls hold. The family draws closer together, bedding piled thick, whispering prayers. You feel the tension, the awareness that a roof here is only planks and nails. Yet somehow, with every snort of a horse and every cluck of a hen, the barn feels alive, protective. Morning comes slowly, the storm easing. You push open the heavy door and are met with dazzling white, the world remade overnight. Inside, the barn exhales a mix of hay, dung, warmth, and relief. The family blinks in the pale light, stiff and sore, but alive. The animals shift restlessly, eager to step out, though snow keeps them penned in for now. You look back once more. The barn is not elegant, not clean, but it was sanctuary. Humans and beasts endured together, warmth exchanged without question, survival shared without hierarchy. On the prairie, the line between human and animal blurred, and perhaps that is what kept so many alive. Step outside now in your mind, snow crunching beneath your boots. Behind you, smoke curls from a cabin, steam drifts from a barn roof, and the storm retreats toward the horizon. For a brief moment, there is stillness, as though the world itself sighs with relief. But you know another storm waits, and when it comes, you will need every wall, every roof, every heartbeat, animal and human alike, to withstand it. Step with me now through the silence after the barn. The storm has passed for the moment, but you can feel the air sharpening again, as if the land itself inhales before another attack. You turn back toward the small cabin, surprised to see snow piled almost to the windowsills. At first glance, it looks like the house is buried, swallowed whole. Then you realize something strange. The family inside welcomes it. One well-recognized truth of life on the prairie was that snow, enemy, destroyer, killer, could also serve as an unexpected ally. Families discovered that when snow drifted high against the walls of their cabins, it acted as insulation. The packed drifts trapped warm air inside and sealed the cracks better than any chinking. So, although snow meant hunger for livestock and danger for travelers, it also meant, paradoxically, a warmer night. You step closer, gloved hand brushing the drift. The snow feels dense, compacted by wind until it is almost solid. It crunches under your palm but does not collapse. The wall of white presses against the logs like a second skin, cold to the touch, yet strangely protective. Curiously, some children made games of digging tunnels into these drifts, carving little caves and calling them snow rooms. Parents scolded them, fearing collapse, but the thrill of sneaking into a frozen alcove was irresistible. Imagine crawling into a tunnel of snow, the walls glowing faintly blue, the air muffled, as though the world outside had been paused. A strange, crystalline playroom, forged by the same storm that could take your life. Scholars still debate whether relying on snowbanks for insulation was clever improvisation or simply a dangerous necessity. Some argue it saved countless families, making cabins warmer without extra fuel. Others insist the risk of collapse or suffocation outweighed the benefits. You feel that tension now, standing against the drift, comfort pressed tight against catastrophe, the frontier in miniature. Inside the cabin, the effect is immediate. The room is quieter, muffled as though wrapped in cotton. The storm outside is still fierce, but its voice is dim, its claws dulled. You sit near the stove and notice how much warmer your knees feel, how the draft at your ankles is gone. Snow seals the house so tightly that even the smell of smoke lingers longer, heavy in the air. The family coughs a little more, but they shiver less. Listen carefully. The snow groans faintly as it settles, a low, shifting sigh. Sometimes ice cracks deep within the drift, a muffled pop like distant thunder. The children freeze when they hear it, eyes wide, waiting to see if the wall will hold. When nothing happens, laughter returns, timid but real. You join in, relieved at the fragile safety snow seems to offer. An unusual account comes from a diary in Dakota Territory. One settler claimed her cabin stayed so warm during storms that she cooked without a coat, thanks to snow piled nearly to the roof. But when thaw came suddenly, water poured through the walls, drenching bedding and food stores. Warmth one week, disaster the next. You picture it vividly. Dripping ceilings, soggy flour, children bailing buckets as though trapped on a sinking ship. Still, in the thick of winter, most families accepted the bargain. They packed snow tighter themselves, pushing it into gaps, piling it higher against doors, sealing windows entirely. Imagine tucking yourself in at night knowing you were buried alive by choice. Your home a coffin of snow but warmer than it would have been without. A strange comfort, chilling in more ways than one. The sensory details weigh on you. The air smells faintly metallic like frozen iron, mingled with smoke and grease. Your breath fogs, curling against the snow-sealed walls and leaving tiny crystals on the logs. The silence deepens until you hear only the crack of wood in the stove and the soft shifting of quilts. You close your eyes and realize how much calmer your body feels without the constant shriek of wind. Experts differ on what this quiet meant. Some argue it gave families mental relief, a break from the relentless howl of prairie storms. Others warn it was isolating, lulling settlers into forgetting the dangers outside. You decide both may be true. Silence can soothe, but it can also deceive. Hours pass. The storm slackens, but the snow remains, packed thick against the cabin. The family dares to peel open the door. It groans, stuck fast, until they force it outward, shoving with shoulders and boots. A wall of white greets them, higher than a man. They dig, breath smoking, muscles aching, until a narrow passage clears. You help them in your mind, lifting shovelfuls, the snow cold against your gloves, each scoop a reminder that survival is labor without end. Later, at dusk, you step outside and look back. The cabin seems half buried, a squat mound in a sea of drifts, smoke curling weakly upward. It looks less like a house and more like a snow fort, a child's creation scaled up to human size. Yet inside, warmth lingers, a small miracle carved from enemy turned ally. Odd as it feels, you find yourself grateful for the snow. Its weight is heavy, its threat real, but tonight it wraps the cabin like a blanket. Tonight, it is the difference between bitter shivers and bearable sleep. As you return to the hearth, pulling a quilt around your shoulders, you think of the contradiction. Snow, the killer of travelers, the burying force of livestock, the architect of blizzards becomes the very thing that keeps you alive when pressed against your walls. The frontier teaches that nothing is simple. Even the storm itself offers gifts, if you are willing to pay their price. The walls are buried deep in snow, muffling the storm, but when night falls, shadows creep back across the cabin. Light becomes as precious as warmth. You glance at the stove and see only a faint glow from the coals. Without something to push back the darkness, the hours stretch endlessly, heavy as the cold itself. That is when families reached for candles, lanterns, anything that could make the black night a little less suffocating. One reliable detail from frontier life is that lighting was scarce and smoky. Tallow candles thick, pale sticks molded from animal fat were the most common. They sputtered, hissed, and dripped, giving off a greasy smell that clung to walls and hair. Kerosene lanterns burned brighter, but their oil was expensive and hard to haul in bulk. Sometimes, settlers made do with improvised lamps, a rag soaked in fat, set in a dish, flame wavering like a small spirit in the gloom. You can almost see one now, a soft, flickering glow pushing outward just far enough to reveal the outlines of faces, the shimmer of patched quilts, the glint of eyes watching the storm from within. Curiously, settlers sometimes repurposed food containers for light, tin cups filled with grease, or even half an onion hollowed and filled with oil, became makeshift lamps. Imagine crouching near a glowing onion bowl, its acrid scent mixing with smoke, light shimmering oddly across the curved surface. It sounds absurd, but survival often balanced on such scraps of invention. Researchers remain divided about how much these dim sources influenced mood. Some suggest that poor lighting deepened feelings of isolation and depression, what we might call cabin fever today. Others argue the flickering glow created intimacy, forcing families to gather close, their faces warmed by a single small flame. You feel that contradiction as you sit in the corner now, half comforted, half unsettled by the smoky light. Listen closely. The candle sputters when a draught sneaks through the chinking. Wax drips in slow rivulets down its side, pooling on the crude wooden table. Lantern glass fogs with soot, shadows stretch long and dance wildly. The storm outside rattles, but here, in this dim bubble, the fight is against darkness itself. The air is thick with smells: tallow, smoke, resin from the fire, the faint sourness of unwashed wool. You breathe it all in, heavy but strangely grounding. An odd story circulates in pioneer letters. One child tried to read by candlelight so dim that he memorized lessons by staring at shadows on the wall instead of the page. His mother later joked that the boy learned more from candle smoke than from books. You picture the child now, head bent, lips moving, light barely touching the worn primer in his hands. The scene is tender but bleak, a reminder of how limited knowledge could be when darkness pressed in. Lighting was also ritual. Families lit candles before prayers, setting them carefully on rough-hewn shelves. The glow made shadows of hands clasped, voices murmuring in unison. For a moment, the storm was silenced by faith flickering in a small flame. You sit with them, eyes closed, feeling the rhythm of whispered words, candlelight soft against your eyelids. Yet hazards were constant. Flames tipped easily, catching on curtains or quilts. Children bore scars from wax drips, small burns etched into skin. Lanterns broke, spilling oil onto wooden floors that could ignite in an instant. You imagine the sudden panic of a flame spreading across straw bedding, the scramble to stamp it out before the cabin itself became an inferno. Fire was salvation, but always one misstep away from destruction. Some historians describe these fragile lights as metaphors for resilience, tiny, wavering, yet persistent against overwhelming darkness. Others dismiss them as reminders of deprivation, proof of how little the settlers had. You stand between those interpretations now, candle in hand, staring at the way the flame bends in the draught. It is pitiful and proud all at once. The sound of the lantern hums low, a faint hiss as kerosene burns. Wax drips steadily. The children whisper stories, their faces half lit, eyes glowing with imagination. The room feels suspended, time slowed by shadows. You realize how silence itself grows heavier without steady light. In the flickering glow you see your own breath, silver threads curling upward, then vanishing. Curiously, some families used soot deliberately, blackening window coverings to keep light from escaping into the night. They feared the glow might attract wandering strangers or wolves, whose eyes sometimes reflected eerily just beyond the cabin. Imagine sealing your only source of comfort so that its glow would not betray you, sitting in deeper gloom for safety's sake. Midnight comes slowly. The candle shortens, flame lowering, guttering. Wax pools, smoke rises thicker, stinging your throat. Someone yawns, pulls a quilt tighter, leans closer to the stove. You watch the last inch of wick curl and vanish, plunging half the room into deeper shadow. The lantern hisses low, oil nearly spent. You feel the ache of weary eyes straining in dimness, the longing for dawn that feels impossibly far away. And yet, there is tenderness in the glow. Families leaned close, sharing stories, singing softly. A lullaby rises now, carried on a mother's cracked voice, weaving with the hum of the lantern. You let your head tilt against the wall, soot staining your hair, eyelids drooping with the rhythm. For a moment, the flickering flame seems less like a struggle and more like a heartbeat, small but steady, promising that the night will pass. When morning finally arrives, the storm has quieted. The shutters creak open, letting pale daylight spill in. The candles are stubs, the lantern's glass blackened with soot. Yet the family is awake, alive, warmed not just by fire but by the fragile courage of light itself. Step outside with them in your imagination. The snow is deep, but the sky is clearing, pale blue stretched above. You look back at the cabin window, faint soot trails marking the paper panes, and realize that inside, every flicker of light mattered. Against the vast black of prairie winter, even a greasy candle was a victory. The lantern hisses low behind you, its glow fading into soot and silence. But now, as you shift under your quilt, you feel the heavier truth of survival on the frontier. Even with walls patched and stoves burning, your body would never stay warm unless you buried yourself beneath layers of bedding. You reach down and tug at the quilt, rough and weighty, smelling faintly of smoke and wool, and realize that this too was a weapon against the storm. One well-documented reality of pioneer households is that quilts were not luxuries, they were lifelines. Women stitched them tirelessly from scraps of old shirts, worn trousers, flour sacks, and whatever fabric could be salvaged. A finished quilt wasn't just decoration, it was insulation, stacked 3 or 4 deep on beds until their weight pressed sleepers flat. You slide under such a pile in your mind, feeling the press of patched squares, each one a fragment of a different garment, stitched into a mosaic of necessity. Oddly enough, these quilts carried stories within them. Some contained bits of wedding dresses, a swatch of military uniform, or even remnants of baby clothes. Imagine tracing your fingers across a patch and realizing it once belonged to your father's jacket or your mother's apron. In the dead of winter, when the wind rattled and wolves howled, the quilt wrapped you not only in warmth but in memory. A patchwork family history heavy enough to keep out death. Historians remain divided on whether such bedding truly kept settlers warm in extreme cold. Some diaries describe nights where breath still froze into frost above sleepers, despite layers of blankets. Others record how families survived -30-degree nights with nothing more than stacked quilts and body heat. Perhaps the truth lies in the tension. Quilts could never defeat the storm completely, but they softened its bite enough to let children sleep. Picture the scene. A straw mattress lies on the packed dirt floor, flattened and prickly. The quilt drapes heavy over it, patched so many times you can't tell original seams from repairs. Children wriggle under the edges, their bare feet icy until the shared warmth takes hold. You slip in among them, shoulder to shoulder, the air close with the scent of wool and unwashed bodies. Slowly, heat builds, not from the stove across the room but from this pile of fabric and flesh, this stubborn cocoon. Listen carefully. The storm outside howls, snow hissing against the roof. Inside, the only sound is the soft rustle of quilts shifting, the murmur of children whispering half asleep, the faint crackle of fire on the other side of the room. Quilts muffle the world. You close your eyes, feel their scratchy weight press into your chest, and for a brief moment, the blizzard might as well be a dream. A peculiar anecdote emerges from settler journals. Some families stuffed quilts with unconventional fillers, grass, feathers from hunted birds, even shredded paper, anything that might trap warmth. One recorded making a quilt lined with rabbit pelts, sewn fur side in. Imagine burrowing under that, soft fur brushing your skin, while frost grew on the rafters above. It was improvisation bordering on eccentric, but survival rarely looked tidy. Some scholars argue that quilting itself became a communal lifeline. Women gathered for quilting bees, stitching by lamplight while gossip and songs filled the air. These gatherings produced warmth in more ways than one, creating bonds between isolated families. Others suggest the practice was as much about sanity as utility, giving restless hands a purpose in the long hours trapped indoors. You let both ideas linger as you run your fingers across the imaginary seams of a quilt, each stitch a small defiance against despair. The sensory experience is vivid. Quilts smell faintly of smoke, grease from the stove, and sometimes mildew when damp crept in. They scratch slightly, especially those made from coarse flour sacks. Yet beneath them, the heat is unmistakable, gathering slow and steady until cheeks flush and breath feels damp. Your legs grow heavy, pinned by the layers. You cannot toss or turn easily, you submit to the quilt's weight, a forced stillness that oddly calms you. An unusual detail surfaces. Some families hung quilts along the walls, not just on beds, to block drafts. Imagine sitting at the table with patchwork curtains fluttering faintly, every bright square a shield against cold. The cabin became less a house than a padded cell, walls muffled with fabric scraps stitched into desperate artistry. You look around now and see color reds faded to pink, blues worn to grey, patterns mismatched yet somehow beautiful against rough logs. The debate persists among historians. Were these patchwork creations expressions of identity and creativity, or were they purely functional rags stitched together without sentiment? Perhaps the answer shifts with each family. Some clearly poured love into patterns, passing quilts down for generations. Others patched quickly, carelessly, more concerned with heat than beauty. Yet in both cases, the result was the same warmth and survival. Night deepens. The family piles closer under the mound of bedding. A father snores softly. A child wiggles between siblings. A mother hums faintly, her voice carrying through cloth. You drift with them, eyelids heavy, body sunk beneath the pressing weight. The storm shrieks outside, but it is distant now, muted by walls, by snowbanks, and by this quilted shield. Oddly, dreams come easier under heavy weight. Settlers wrote of sleeping deeply, even when temperatures fell to unimaginable lows, so long as the quilts were thick enough. You too find yourself surrendering to the heaviness, the sense that nothing can move you, nothing can intrude. The quilt becomes a barrier not only to cold but to thought itself. By dawn, frost rims your hair, but your body is warm beneath the covers. The stove has gone out, the fire cold, yet the family still stirs alive. Quilts, damp at the edges, have carried you through another night. You rise slowly, lifting the layers, feeling the cold rush in the instant they're gone. Breath fogs in the air, toes curl on frozen ground, but the memory of warmth lingers like an embrace. You look back once more at the bed, at the patchwork mountain, and realize that survival on the frontier was as much sown as it was built. The quilts still cling to your shoulders, heavy and warm, but as you rise in your imagination, your eye falls on another frontier invention just as critical: the door. It seems ordinary today, but in a world where a blizzard could strip the skin from your face, the cabin door was no casual detail. It was the thin plank that marked the line between storm and hearth, chaos and calm. One well-established fact of pioneer homes is that doors were rarely factory-made. Out here, far from towns or carpenters, families built their own, often from rough planks hacked with axes. Nails were precious, sometimes carried hundreds of miles in sacks, so settlers fastened pieces with wooden pegs, rawhide thongs, or leather hinges cut from oxen harness. You picture yourself now pushing against such a door, its surface rough, splintery, smelling of sap and smoke. It doesn't swing easily, it groans like a tired ox, but it holds the storm outside. Oddly, some families used animal hides instead of wood at first, hanging buffalo or deer skins over the doorway when timber was scarce. The hides froze stiff at night, rattling when the wind pressed against them, and thawed slightly in the warmth of the day, dripping as they softened. Imagine brushing past such a frozen hide, your shoulder grazing the stiff fur, feeling the divide between wilderness and hearth, reduced to a single skin. Historians continue to argue over how secure these doors really were. Some describe them as solid barriers, proof of ingenuity with limited tools. Others note how poorly they sealed, leaving gaps that let in snow and drafts. You sense that truth in the air around you now, the faint hiss of cold sneaking through cracks even as the latch bar rests firm. The door is not impenetrable, but it is enough to say, "Here we stop the storm." Step closer. A child slides the wooden latch into place. the sound a soft clunk that feels oddly comforting. You lift the latch again in your mind, feel its weight, rough-hewn and uneven, yet sturdy in your hand. There is satisfaction in its simplicity. No lock and key, no polished brass, just wood holding wood. Survival hinged on something you could carve with a knife. The soundscape shifts with every push of wind. Outside, the storm claws at the cabin, snow scraping against the walls, drumming faintly against the door. Inside, the latch rattles, leather hinges creak, but the barrier holds. It is not silence, but a negotiation. The storm insists. The door replies with its stubborn refusal. You lean against it, shoulder to plank, and feel it tremble but not give way. A peculiar detail survives in some settler accounts. Doors were often so low that adults had to stoop to enter. Built small to conserve heat, they forced even the proudest pioneer to bow as they crossed the threshold. Imagine visitors arriving during a blizzard, bending low, stamping snow from their boots, ducking into warmth. Humility was not optional, it was built into the frame. And then there are the latches. Some were nothing more than sticks propped against the door. Others had clever sliding bars, carved with whittled grooves. Children loved to work these contraptions, pulling them back and forth, pretending they commanded great gates. You hear the clatter now, the satisfying click of wood against wood. To a family trapped in winter, even a latch became entertainment, a symbol of safety in miniature. Some researchers interpret these crude doors as symbols of frontier resilience, fragile yet functional thresholds marking the claim of humans against wilderness. Others emphasize their fragility. Wolves, thieves, or even a strong gust could break through if determined enough. As you trace your hand along the plank, you realize both readings have merit. The door is not a fortress, but it is a declaration. Inside, by candlelight, the door takes on an almost sacred aura. Families hung herbs or charms nearby, sometimes a horseshoe nailed to the frame, sometimes a sprig of evergreen. These little rituals whispered of hope, of warding off more than cold, evil, sickness, loneliness. You lean closer and smell dried sage tied above the lintel, its earthy fragrance mixing with smoke. The door is both barrier and talisman. An odd anecdote appears in one diary. A settler claimed his door froze solid to the frame one night, trapping the family inside until morning thaw. They laughed later, but at the time they feared suffocation. Windows sealed with snow, their only exit blocked. You imagine pressing hard, shoulder straining, feeling the wood unmoving, hearing children whimper as you hammer with fists. It is a claustrophobic thought protection becoming prison. Listen again. The latch clunks, the hinges creak, and beyond, the storm roars. Each time the door shakes, you feel its determination to resist. You picture the father leaning against it while the family huddles in quilts, as though his body itself reinforces the barrier. The scent of pine resin and cold air leaks through, a reminder of the fragile line between safety and exposure. Oddly, settlers sometimes carved initials into their doors, or crude patterns, as if to declare ownership in a land that resisted them. Imagine stepping out at dawn, storm cleared, seeing the rough mark of your name carved into the plank, a bold message to the wilderness. We are here. By morning, frost crusts the hinges, making them groan as you pull the door open. The outside world is a blank sea of snow, dazzling and cruel. Yet the cabin survived another night, and the door, crude and splintered, deserves some credit. You step back inside, closing it firmly behind you, the latch falling into place with that soft, reassuring clunk. Behind this rough barrier lies warmth, laughter, and the stubborn will to endure. Beyond it lies the endless storm, and so, every night, the door becomes more than wood. It is hope, nailed together, standing upright against the prairie's howl. The door latches shut behind you, and you draw a deep breath of smoky, warm air. For a while you think the cabin might be its own world, sealed against whatever waits beyond. Then the sound comes long, wavering, wild. A howl rides the wind, stretching across the frozen prairie. It rises and falls, joined by others until the whole horizon seems to sing with hungry voices. You pause, heart slowing, realizing that the walls separating you from those voices are little more than logs and clay. One undeniable feature of frontier winters was the presence of wolves. They roamed in packs, their lean shapes cutting across the whiteness, their eyes glowing faint when lantern light caught them. Settlers wrote often of lying awake, while wolves prowled just beyond their cabins, drawn by the smell of smoke, food, and livestock. You tilt your head now and hear their chorus, a haunting music layered beneath the storm's howl. Curiously, journals describe wolves scratching at doors or circling barns, their paws thudding softly in the snow. Children sometimes mistook those sounds for neighbors arriving late. Imagine tugging the latch open and meeting not a friend but a pair of yellow eyes gleaming in the dark. The thought chills you more deeply than the wind ever could. Experts still debate how serious the wolf threat truly was. Some argue settlers exaggerated the danger, projecting fears onto animals that mostly scavenged rather than attacked. Others counter with tales of livestock torn apart, dogs dragged from yards, even rare stories of humans chased across fields. You sit with that uncertainty now, hearing the scratching at the edge of your imagination, unsure if it is predator or paranoia that rattles the door. Inside the cabin, the family reacts in subtle ways. The dog lifts its head, ears twitching, then curls tighter, whimpering faintly. The father reaches for his rifle, leaning it against the wall by his bedroll. The children hush instinctively, eyes wide in the candle's glow. The mother pulls Quilts closer, as though fabric itself could muffle the sound. You feel the shift in the air, the way laughter dies, the way silence thickens, every heart listening to the wilderness pressing close. The smell of fear mingles with the ordinary scents of smoke and wool. You imagine your own pulse quickening, breath shallow. The sound outside continues, paw steps crunching in the snow, faint snarls carried by wind. Wolves do not respect the fragile line of walls. They test it, pacing, waiting, reminding the settlers that the frontier was never truly theirs. One odd anecdote survives. Families sometimes tossed scraps of food outside during long storms, hoping to distract the wolves. Picture a mother flinging bones into the snow while children peek through cracks, watching dark shapes dart in and out of the pale drifts. It was dangerous generosity, giving a taste of safety in exchange for a night's peace. The soundscape is unnerving. The wind shrieks across the chimney, the logs creak, and through it all, the mournful howls swell and fade. You close your eyes, but the sound seems to vibrate in your chest, primal, ancient. The dog growls softly, low and steady, as though warning both the wolves and the humans inside. Some historians argue that these moments of listening families huddled in silence, wolves circling unseen, symbolize the thinness of the settlers' conquest. Civilization had not tamed the land. It was only tolerated, and only barely. Others suggest the fear of wolves was more psychological than physical, an echo of folklore carried from Europe, where wolves had long haunted human stories. You consider both as you sit against the log wall, ears tuned to the wilderness just beyond. Then the storm shifts. Snow lessens for a moment, moonlight cutting pale silver through the papered window. Shadows move outside, swift and low. You imagine them, lean bodies slipping through drifts, tails trailing, eyes reflecting light. The family does not move, holding breath as if motion itself might summon intrusion. For minutes that feel like hours, you are suspended in the space between two worlds inside, warmth and fragile calm. Outside, hunger and silence with teeth. And yet, even amid fear, there is a kind of awe. To hear wolves sing across an endless prairie is to know you are not alone, no matter how isolated. Their voices, fierce and mournful, weave into the storm's music, a reminder that life persists everywhere, even in the dead of winter. You feel it in your bones, the uncanny beauty of danger, the intimacy of being noticed by wildness. An unusual story recorded by a settler tells of wolves pacing so close that their hot breath frosted the window covering. The family inside swore they could smell the musk of the animals mixing with the smoke of their own fire. You shiver at that thought. Scent and sound bleeding across the barrier, predator and prey separated by nothing but logs. Finally, the howls fade. The storm carries them farther, scattering voices across the white horizon. The family exhales as one, tension draining, though sleep will not come easily tonight. You two sit back, shoulders relaxing, grateful for silence but haunted by echoes that still hum faintly in your ears. Dawn will show paw prints circling the cabin, pressed deep into the snow like signatures left in warning. Children will step outside to fetch wood, eyes darting, hearts racing, boots sinking into the marks left by unseen watchers. Life will resume, chores will continue, but the memory will linger. The night when the frontier walls felt thinner than paper, when wilderness sang at the door. And as you close your eyes again, pulling the quilt tighter, you realize that survival here was not only about warmth or food, it was about living with fear, acknowledging it, and learning to breathe anyway. On the frozen prairie, you were never truly alone, and that truth was both comfort and curse. The wolves' howls fade into distance, but the memory clings to the cabin walls. You sit back on the straw mattress, listening to the logs settle, when another sound breaks the hush, the low murmur of voices. They do not come from a single family but from next door, or rather, from the other side of a wall shared by two households. You realize then that not all frontier cabins stood alone. Sometimes, survival meant clustering close, attaching homes together so warmth and company might bleed across. One firmly recorded feature of prairie life is that families often built cabins side by side or even back to back, sharing walls to save labor and wood. Two households could split the cost of sawn boards or beams, and the adjoining walls meant less heat loss. You picture yourself standing between them now, one thin timber partition dividing neighbors whose lives were as tangled as the logs they stacked. Curiously, there are accounts of settlers cutting doorways directly between cabins, so children could pass back and forth without stepping outside into the blizzard. Imagine tugging open a crude door inside your own living room, greeted not by snow but by another family huddled around their stove. You hear the laughter of cousins mingling with your own, quilts swapped across thresholds, soup shared without ceremony. A strange domestic village formed inside the snowbound world. Researchers disagree about how harmonious these arrangements truly were. Some describe them as lifelines against loneliness, the joining of voices and prayers across thin walls. Others note the inevitable quarrels, arguments over firewood, noise, or borrowed tools made sharper by confinement. You feel that tension now as you sit in the glow of the stove, comfort in numbers, but also claustrophobia when privacy dissolves. The soundscape shifts with this closeness. Through the log wall you hear a baby cry, muffled but insistent. A man coughs on the other side, hacking into the dark. A fiddle plays softly, the tune leaking faintly through the seams. It is both reassuring and intrusive, a reminder that your struggles are not solitary, but also not secret. An unusual detail emerges from diaries. Sometimes families leaned their beds against the shared wall so they could speak to neighbors without leaving their quilts. Picture lying half asleep, whispering through cracks in the logs, trading news or jokes in the pitch black of a winter night. It is intimacy born of necessity, voices traveling through wood like whispers across time. Step into the neighbor's cabin now in your mind. It smells slightly different, more cabbage, less smoke, but the rhythm is the same. Stove glowing, quilts stacked, children yawning. They nod at you with weary familiarity, their faces pale in the lantern's flicker. You realize how similar every room is in this landscape, every family drawing from the same fragile script of endurance. Some historians argue that these clustered cabins planted the seeds of frontier communities, knitting settlers into webs of obligation and cooperation. Others caution that such arrangements strained tempers, that proximity without space bred resentment as much as kinship. You run your hand along the shared wall and feel both interpretations at once, strength and friction bound tightly together. Listen again. The wind shrieks outside, battering snow against the outer walls. But inside, the combined voices of two households rise against it. Hymns swell faintly, overlapping, imperfect but earnest. Children laugh across the threshold, chasing each other until mothers scold. For a moment, you feel as though the storm has been reduced to background noise, its power checked by a chorus of human presence. One curious anecdote lingers from a settler's letter. During a particularly brutal January, 3 families connected their cabins with makeshift tunnels of snow, crawling through them like foxes to share meals and keep watch. When spring arrived, the tunnels collapsed into slush, but the memory endured as proof that ingenuity often blurred the line between absurdity and brilliance. You picture yourself crawling through a snow passage now, lantern in hand, laughter echoing from the far side, the storm muffled above. The sensory atmosphere deepens. The shared wall is warm to the touch, heat from both stoves bleeding into it. You smell bread baking next door, mingling with the scent of beans simmering on your side. Quilts hang across the partition, bright patches swaying faintly in the draught, as though trying to stitch the households closer still. Every sense tells you that you are not alone, that survival here is collective. Still, there are cracks in that closeness. Quarrels erupt over who chops more wood, who tends the fire, who hogs the stove. Children cry louder when too many bodies crowd into a single room. Privacy vanishes, the smallest argument heard by every ear. You hear it now, muffled voices rising sharper through the logs, a dispute over nothing and everything at once. Silence follows, tense, until a fiddle tune starts again, smoothing tempers as best it can. Some scholars suggest that without this enforced intimacy, settlers would have fractured, abandoned claims, and fled east. Others believe the strain of such proximity actually drove many back. Whatever the case, you feel in your bones that life here was never solitary, even if every family imagined itself alone. Walls carried voices as much as they blocked wind. Night falls heavier. The storm presses close, but 2 stoves burn instead of one. 2 circles of quilts glow in the lamplight. Through cracks in the partition, faint lines of gold trace the seams, proof that warmth and light bleed across, ignoring borders. You lie back, eyes on the roof beams, listening to the murmur of neighbors, the occasional burst of laughter. The storm may rage outside, but here, behind this crude architecture of sharing, life continues stubbornly. Oddly enough, when spring came, some families dismantled the connecting walls, eager to reclaim privacy. Others left them in place, finding comfort in proximity even after survival was less dire. You consider both choices, recognizing the complexity of human need, to be together, to be apart, to balance survival with self. For now, though, in the heart of winter, 2 households breathe as one. The cabins do not stand isolated against the storm. They lean into each other, imperfect and human, their warmth multiplied. And as you drift under your quilt, lulled by voices through the wall, you know that even here where the horizon swallows, all sound connection survives. The neighbor's laughter fades to a murmur, and you lean back against the log wall, feeling its rough surface cool through the quilt. Even with 2 stoves burning and snowbanks pressed high outside, the wind still finds its way in. Tiny drafts creep along the floor, teasing ankles, whispering through cracks you can't even see. You realize that chinking alone could never seal everything, and so families reached for other methods, layering new tricks into their walls and floors in hopes of holding back the endless cold. One widely acknowledged practice among pioneers was the use of paper, cloth, or straw to insulate cabins. Families pasted old newspapers directly onto log walls, overlapping sheets until the room became a patchwork of print. Others stuffed straw or dry grass between planks, cramming it in until no space remained. You run your fingers along such a wall in your mind, the paper crackling beneath your touch. its surface faintly gritty from smoke. Sentences blur together, headlines about faraway wars or politics glowing faintly by lantern light, strange companions for sleepless nights. Curiously, some households covered entire ceilings with cloth, draping sheets like sails above the room to trap rising heat. Imagine lying on your straw mattress, staring upward at fabric shifting gently in the draught, its surface darkening with soot as days wore on. For children, it became a secret sky, a canopy where they whispered dreams while snow pounded the roof overhead. Scholars continue to discuss how effective these improvisations were. Some argue they made a measurable difference, reducing drafts and conserving warmth. Others suggest the comfort was more psychological than physical, offering the sense of control when nature allowed none. You feel both possibilities pressing against you now. Perhaps the warmth is real, or perhaps it is only belief stitched and pasted into the walls. The sensory details are sharp. The paper smells of grease where it's been brushed with lard to keep out moisture, a faint sourness mixing with wood smoke. Straw crackles when you press your palm to the wall, shedding dust that tickles your nose. In the quiet, you hear faint rustling mice moving through the hidden grass insulation, tiny bodies thriving where humans fight to endure. The irony is not lost on you. Every layer of defense becomes a habitat for something else. An unusual anecdote appears in letters. One settler family lined their walls with empty flour sacks, sewn together like wallpaper. The printed logos, mill names, bold lettering glowed dimly in the lamplight, giving the cabin the accidental look of a mercantile shop. Imagine sitting at the table, sipping weak coffee, and reading Minneapolis Best stamped in block letters across your wall. A strange comfort, perhaps, but also a reminder of scarcity turned into resource. The soundscape deepens as night settles. The stove pings softly as it cools, while the wind rattles faintly at the corners. Paper on the walls shivers with each gust, making a dry, fluttering noise, like wings beating faintly in the dark. Quilts hung as curtains sway gently, their edges brushing the floor with a whisper. Even in stillness, the cabin hums with life, every patch and layer shifting, creaking, settling into place. Some historians interpret these makeshift insulations as proof of human adaptability, scraps and rags transformed into bulwarks against annihilation. Others see them as evidence of desperation, each measure temporary, fragile, and destined to fail under real stress. You weigh the arguments in silence, hand pressed to the rustling wall, wondering if survival lies more in ingenuity or stubborn denial. Look around carefully now. The cabin glows with mismatched textures. One wall is dark log, patched with moss. Another is bright with pasted paper, yellowed at the edges. The ceiling sags with cloth nailed tight. Quilts cover a drafty corner, scraps of red and blue patches dancing in the lamplight. It is not elegant, it is almost chaotic, but it feels strangely human. A collage of lives stitched and pressed together against the cold. An odd practice sometimes mentioned in frontier folklore was the use of raw animal hides nailed inside as insulation. Skins stiffened with frost, giving off a rank odor as they thawed near the stove. Children wrinkled their noses. Adults tolerated it, but still the hides kept drafts at bay. Imagine sleeping with your head against such a wall, smelling faint musk and grease, yet grateful for the thin layer that stopped the wind from reaching your bones. The hours stretch, the storm claws outside, but you sit beneath a cloth-draped ceiling, walls padded with newsprint and straw, quilts fluttering faintly. The patchwork feels like a fragile cocoon, trembling but whole. You exhale slowly, shoulders loosening as the drafts lessen. Perhaps it is only a little warmer, but on nights like this, a little is enough. Oddly enough, children often learned their letters from those pasted newspapers. By day, in the thin light, they traced words on the walls, reading aloud headlines that once mattered in far-off cities. Education stitched directly into insulation. Imagine reciting the alphabet while pointing at an article about the president or a farming dispute, history absorbed while trying to stay warm. As dawn breaks faintly, the paper still clings to the walls. The straw still rustles in hidden gaps. Frost sparkles along the seams, but the family wakes alive, voices rough but steady. The improvisations have done their work, not perfectly, not elegantly, but enough. Step outside in your imagination. Snow drifts high, wind sighs low, but smoke curls from the chimney. Inside, a strange collage of paper, cloth, straw, and hides has turned a log shell into something that can almost be called a home. Against the endless white, the cabin stands as a patchwork of survival, each scrap stitched not just into walls but into memory. The paper-lined walls rustle faintly as morning light seeps through the greased window panes, but the rhythm of the house never truly rests. While adults mend cracks and tend the stove, it is the children who become the restless energy inside these fragile rooms. The storm makes prisoners of everyone, yet even in confinement, chores wait. You glance toward the corner where a boy shrugs into a woolen coat, cheeks flushed, preparing for another round of labor that seems endless. One well-attested reality of frontier life is that children's work was not optional. Even during the worst blizzards, they hauled in firewood, fetched water from streams when they weren't frozen solid, and tended to livestock if barns lay nearby. Without their help, families simply could not keep pace with the demands of survival. You imagine a girl no older than 10, arms wrapped around a log almost as heavy as herself, stumbling toward the stove, frost glittering on her braids. Strangely enough, many children looked back on these chores with pride. In later memoirs, they described the satisfaction of being trusted with essential tasks, of knowing their small hands mattered. One recalled carrying buckets of snow into the cabin to melt for drinking water, laughing as it steamed in the pot. The transformation magical. You picture such a moment now. Children crowding around a kettle, watching snow become liquid gold under the stove's heat. Historians continue to disagree on whether this labor hardened children into resilience or robbed them of childhood entirely. Some argue it forged independence earlier than any modern upbringing. Others insist it forced premature adulthood, erasing play in favor of endless work. Sitting here now, you hear both truths echoed in the thud of wood dropped by the stove, in the weary but proud smile of a boy who knows he has kept his family warm another night. The sounds of their chores become the soundtrack of survival. The clank of the water bucket on the floor, the rasp of a saw as an older child trims kindling, the shuffle of boots across packed dirt. You notice how the younger ones mimic their elders, straining to carry twigs or sweep ash, eager to prove themselves. Even their play turns into practice. Stick battles by the fire mimic chopping wood. Dolls tucked into scraps of cloth echo the care of siblings. An unusual anecdote surfaces in a settler's diary. One child entertained himself during storms by sculpting snowballs indoors, sneaking them through the door, then watching them melt on the stove until his mother caught him. He laughed, even as she scolded. The cabin filled with the hiss of melting snow and the smell of wet mittens steaming. You grin faintly, seeing the humor in the mischief, even in such a grim season. Step deeper into the rhythm of their days. Morning begins with hauling wood, the stove's embers coaxed back into flame. Water, if liquid, must be fetched. If frozen, snow must be melted. By noon, children sweep, patch leaks with rags, hold lanterns steady while parents mend tools. Evening brings the quieter duties, stirring pots, rocking babies, spreading quilts for sleep. Each act seems small, but taken together, they weave the invisible net that keeps the storm at bay. The sensory experience is vivid. You smell damp wool drying by the stove, acrid and smoky. You feel rough splinters prick your palm as a child hauls logs inside. You hear water slosh against a tin bucket, the metal ringing when set down too hard. Every detail carries the weight of necessity, each task a thread holding the fabric of life together. Some scholars argue that children's participation blurred the line between necessity and education. By working, They learned skills they would need as adults, their lessons carved not into books but into muscle and memory. Others suggest the burden was too great, that the frontier demanded sacrifices too steep for young shoulders. You can sense both as you watch a girl scrape frost from the window with her mitten, her breath fogging the greasy pane. Is she learning resilience or losing something tender? Perhaps both. The storm thickens again, snow driving against the cabin, yet inside the chores continue. A boy crouches by the hearth, blowing on coals until they flare. His sister balances a kettle, careful not to spill. The youngest, barely toddling, drags a stick across the floor, pretending it's firewood. Their play, their work, their survival all bleed together in the dim light. An odd memory lingers from one pioneer's letter. She recalled her children turning daily chores into songs, chanting rhymes while fetching wood or melting snow. Their voices rose above the storm, weaving rhythm into drudgery. You hear it now, faint but sweet, a sing-song cadence that makes the work less heavy. Even in hardship, music stitched itself into survival. Night falls, but children do not rest until their tasks are done. A boy latches the door against the wind, the wood clunking into place. A girl folds quilts neatly, though her fingers are cracked and raw. Their faces glow by candlelight, weary but satisfied. You feel pride in the air, unspoken but solid, as though the house itself has acknowledged their contribution. And when finally they lie down, nestled beneath patchwork covers, the day's labor clings to them still. Their hands smell of wood smoke, their hair of damp wool, their cheeks streaked faintly with soot. Yet their breathing slows, steady, as though the storm cannot touch them in dreams. You listen, heart softening, as the rhythm of chores gives way to the rhythm of sleep. Step back from the scene now. The cabin is quiet but not empty. It hums with the work that children carried through the day. Every stick of wood, every bucket of water, every patched seam bears their mark. Outside, the storm continues its endless argument with the prairie. But inside, the youngest settlers have already proven themselves guardians of warmth. The children drift into uneasy sleep, but the storm does not care. It prowls outside, steady and merciless, and soon the cabin itself begins to reveal its limits. You glance toward the water bucket near the stove, expecting to see steam rising from its rim. Instead, a pale sheet of ice glimmers at the surface. You touch it with your fingertip, hard, cold, unyielding. Even inside the shelter, winter has crept in. One well-documented hardship on the frontier was that water frequently froze indoors. Diaries tell of buckets turned solid overnight, basins of wash water rimmed with ice despite fires stoked until dawn. Families sometimes woke to find frost on their quilts, their breath crystallized on rafters, icicles hanging from nails driven into walls. You look upward now and see them, thin white daggers suspended from the roof beams, glistening faintly in lantern light. The line between outside and inside is blurred to nothing. Curiously enough, some families joked darkly that they could skate from one end of the cabin to the other if the floor iced over. One boy remembered sliding across bare boards in his socks, laughing until his mother scolded him for catching cold. You picture him now, cheeks red, hair stiff with frost, turning a bitter reality into a brief game. It is almost comic until you remember that cold sickness could kill. Experts remain divided on how settlers coped with such cold intrusions. Some argue the fire was never truly enough, no matter how much wood was burned. Others suggest better chinking and insulation might have prevented it, blaming poor craftsmanship rather than weather alone. Standing here, breath fogging in the dim light, you sense both possibilities: human ingenuity at its limits, and nature pressing far beyond. The sensory world inside the cabin is unsettling. Frost webs across the greased paper window, delicate and cruelly beautiful. Quilts near the wall feel stiff, edges hardened with ice, where condensation froze overnight. When you inhale, the air is dry, searing your throat. When you exhale, your breath swirls white, vanishing into the gloom. Even the stove, glowing faintly red, seems small against such immensity. Listen. Water cracks softly as ice expands in the bucket. The stove hisses as snow dropped from the roof melts down the chimney. A child coughs in sleep, voice hoarse, lungs strained from the chill. The soundscape is fragile, every noise evidence that the cold has breached the walls. An unusual anecdote surfaces from one settler's recollection. A family reported waking to find bread frozen solid on the table, their breakfast as hard as stone. They thawed it by placing slices directly against the stove's iron sides, the smell of scorched crust filling the room. Imagine chewing such food with numb teeth, grateful for every bite no matter how bitter it tasted. The cold seeped into bodies as easily as into walls, toes numbed under quilts, fingers stiffened even while tending fires. Frostbite claimed skin not carefully wrapped. You run your hands over your own in imagination, feeling them sting, then dull, then throb as if they might shatter. In these moments, survival was not only about building walls, it was about enduring when those walls failed. Some historians suggest that such conditions tested mental resilience more than physical. Families could work endlessly, chopping wood and patching gaps, but when frost grew inside their own beds, despair set in. Others argue that endurance became its own kind of routine, that settlers accepted frozen buckets as casually as we accept morning dew. You weigh both ideas while staring at the pale ice rim, wondering how many chose laughter and how many chose silence. The fire must be fed again. You picture the father rising, stiff and weary, stuffing logs into the stove until sparks leap upward. The iron glows brighter, heat radiates, but it cannot reach the corners. The frost remains on the quilts, the icicles continue to hang. Warmth here is not about comfort, it is about keeping the edge of death just one step further away. Oddly enough, settlers sometimes placed buckets of hot stones under quilts to keep warm, only to wake and find them rimmed with frost an hour later. One woman recalled wrapping potatoes in cloth and slipping them into her children's beds, turning food into a fragile furnace. Imagine clutching a potato like a talisman, its heat fading slowly in your palms, your breath fogging above it. You listen as the family stirs. A child wakes and whimpers, complaining that his blanket is frozen stiff. A mother strokes his hair, whispering promises of dawn. Her words mist into the air, lingering visible before fading. You feel the cabin breathing with them, each exhale a small cloud of defiance against the blizzard's grip. Morning does not bring relief. Sunlight glints off the windows, but inside, the bucket is still frozen. The children crunch frost underfoot as they rise, laughing at the sight of their own icy footprints on the dirt floor. The mother scrapes ice from a tin cup, her hands red and raw. They do not cry out or despair, they simply continue, as if this too is ordinary. Scholars argue about what such endurance means. Some see it as proof of stubborn heroism, the human spirit unbroken even by the harshest cold. Others frame it as evidence of unnecessary suffering, a sign settlers push too far into lands unforgiving. You close your eyes, hearing the debate echo like the wind outside, realizing perhaps both are true. Courage and folly often sleep side by side. Step back in your mind. The cabin stands buried in snow, smoke trailing weakly from its chimney. Inside, frost clings stubbornly, a reminder that walls are only suggestions against winter's command. And yet the family lives, breathing, moving, laughing faintly even as ice forms in their cups. You draw the quilt tighter, the air biting your skin, and feel the contradiction sharpen. Survival on the prairie was not a battle that could be won. It was a dance, sometimes graceful, sometimes clumsy, always with frost close at hand. And as you drift into uneasy rest, the bucket of frozen water glimmers faintly, a silent witness to endurance pressed to its very edge. The bucket of frozen water still glimmers faintly in the dim light, but for now, you turn your attention to the voices that rise in its shadow. The storm howls on, but within these walls, another kind of sound pushes back. Words, songs, and stories bloom in the flicker of fire and candle, weaving warmth that no quilt or stove alone could provide. One often remarked truth of frontier winters is that families passed the long nights not in silence but in storytelling and music. Tales were told and retold, hymns hummed, fiddle strings plucked, voices raised to drown out the storm's roar. Entertainment was survival, a balm against fear and monotony. You close your eyes and hear it now, the deep rumble of a father's voice spinning a story, the higher trill of children chiming in, the gentle hum of a mother's lullaby blending with the hiss of wind outside. Curiously, settlers often reached for the same handful of songs, repeated until their melodies seemed stitched into the very fabric of the cabin. "Shall we gather at the river?" echoed as often as children's rhymes, both serving the same purpose: rhythm, reassurance, the insistence that voices could carry farther than cold. Imagine humming the same refrain night after night, until its cadence becomes indistinguishable from the crackle of firewood. Scholars remain divided on how much these shared rituals mattered. Some argue they built resilience, creating bonds that tethered families together in their confinement. Others suggest they were distractions, fragile as paper, incapable of masking the grinding despair of endless storms. You feel both perspectives as you listen, the warmth in the laughter of children giggling at a tall tale, and the exhaustion beneath the father's forced chuckle. The sensory texture is vivid. The fiddle creaks, its resinous bow scraping unevenly, yet the sound glows bright in the cramped space. A child claps wooden spoons together in rhythm, the hollow clack strangely cheerful. The mother's voice, though thin and cracked with cold, fills the room with hymn fragments. And over it all, the storm mutters faintly, unable to quite smother human defiance. An unusual anecdote lingers from one family's diary. The children invented storm dramas, acting out little plays where snow was a villain and quilts became shields. They laughed at their own theatrics, their parents watching with weary amusement. Picture the scene now. A boy wrapped in a quilt, stomping like the blizzard itself, while his sister wields a broom as a sword, fending him off. Their giggles rise like sparks, fleeting but bright. The rhythm of storytelling flows naturally. Some nights bring Bible verses, recited slowly by candlelight. Other nights, fathers recount adventures from earlier travels, embellished until they sound like epics. Children beg for repetition. Tell the one about the bear again, and the story grows in each retelling, humor or danger, heightened to fit the mood. You lean in with them, eyes wide, caught between dread of the storm and delight in the tale. The smell of tallow fills the air as candles drip, mingling with smoke and damp wool. You press your quilt closer, the weight grounding you as voices weave above. The stories are not polished, they stumble, wander, repeat, but they are alive, and that is what matters. Some researchers interpret these moments as evidence that the frontier was not only physical survival but cultural survival. Music and myth held the cold at bay as surely as wood and mud. Others caution against romanticizing, pointing out how often journals mention boredom, quarrels, or the same stories repeated to the point of weariness. You hear that tension now in the father's sigh as he begins a familiar tale, his voice weary, his children still eager. Another odd detail appears. One settler recalled using the Bible not only for readings but as a literal prop in games, balancing it on heads to see who could walk straight the longest. Faith, humor, necessity all blurred together in the cramped space. You imagine laughter echoing even as sacred words wobble precariously atop a child's curls. The storm rages harder outside, but the room pulses with song. Hymns swell, clumsy but earnest, voices weaving into a fragile choir. When the last note fades, silence descends heavy, broken only by the hiss of wind. Yet that silence is different now. It feels less like despair, more like rest after exertion. A child whispers a question. Will the storm ever end? The mother hushes softly, smoothing hair, answering with a story of spring green grass rising, birds returning, rivers rushing free. The tale is half memory, half hope, but it fills the room with a new kind of warmth. You feel it seep into you too, an image of color against white, of thaw against frost. Some historians suggest that these small acts of imagination were as critical as fire itself. Others argue they were illusions, delaying the reckoning with real hardship. Perhaps both are true. In this moment, though, you know that without such stories, the walls would collapse inward, even if the logs remained upright. The hours stretch, children doze mid-song, their heads heavy on shoulders. The fiddle rests, bough slipping to the floor, candles gutter low, shadows stretching. You remain under quilts, body warm, mind filled with echoes of hymns and laughter. Outside, wolves may circle, snow may climb higher, but inside, the storm has been reduced to a backdrop for human voices. Dawn finally presses faintly at the greased paper pane. The storm lingers, but the night has passed. The stories fade into memory, lingering like embers. You rise slowly, stretching stiff limbs, still hearing the echo of last night's chorus in your ears. For a brief moment, you feel lighter, as though words themselves stitched a new quilt around the family. Step outside in your imagination. Snow still covers the land, the world still white and merciless. Yet smoke trails upward from the chimney, proof that life persists. Inside, voices are hoarse, eyes weary, but hearts remain stitched together by song, by story, by the stubborn belief that even in a world of frozen water and howling wolves, humanity can speak louder than the storm. The echoes of songs still linger in your ears, but daylight brings a harsher reminder. Music cannot feed bellies, stories do not split logs, and though the cabin holds, its walls are only as strong as the stores of fuel that keep the stove glowing. You glance toward the woodpile stacked in the corner. It has shrunk alarmingly since the last storm. The family's eyes follow it too. Every log consumed another tally in the slow countdown of winter. One undeniable fact of frontier survival was the relentless hunger for fuel. A small stove devoured astonishing amounts of wood, sometimes a cord every week in bitter weather. Families spent autumn cutting, splitting, and stacking, yet still found themselves running short by midwinter. You imagine the father's back bent beneath an axe, his breath clouding in the chill, each strike not just labor but a promise of warmth. An odd tidbit from settler journals tells of desperate families burning anything combustible when firewood ran low, broken furniture, wagon wheels, even books. One woman wrote of feeding her children by cooking bread over the flames of a disassembled bed frame. You can smell the acrid smoke now, pine and varnish curling in your throat, warmth bought at the cost of comfort. Scholars remain divided on whether shortages reflected poor planning or simply the brutality of weather. Some insist careful settlers always laid in enough wood. Others argue storms lasted longer and colder than any human foresight could predict. You feel that argument echo in the hollow crack of a log on the chopping block. Was survival skill or luck? Step closer. The woodpile is low, the corner dim. Each log is precious, its bark flaking dry under your hand. The father lifts one and places it on the stove, the hiss of sap loud in the stillness. For a moment, the room brightens, but everyone watches the pile shrink further. Children whisper, asking if there will be enough. No one answers. Listen carefully. The axe strikes outside, muffled by snow. Wood splits with a sharp crack, echoing through the frozen air. The wind sighs, carrying away smoke from the chimney. Inside, the stove ticks as heat expands its iron skin. The sounds are simple, but each one is a thread in the fragile fabric of survival. An unusual anecdote surfaces in one memoir. Settlers sometimes filled gaps with dried buffalo chips, collected animal dung burned when wood was scarce. The smell was pungent, earthy, almost unbearable indoors, but it gave off steady heat. Imagine tossing such a fuel into the stove, children covering their noses, smoke thick with bitterness. You wrinkle your nose even now, yet feel the strange relief that warmth still came. The sensory world sharpens as fuel runs low. The stove glows dimmer, the air cools quicker. Frost creeps back onto quilts, breath fogs thicker. The woodpile whispers its countdown with every log lifted. Hunger presses in not only for food but for fire itself. Some researchers frame firewood as the true currency of frontier winters, more valuable than coins or trinkets. Others highlight the ingenuity of settlers, finding heat in whatever they could burn. You sit between these views now, staring at the last few logs, realizing that both wealth and cleverness end the same way. Ash. Picture the father trudging outside, axe over his shoulder, into snow waist deep. His boots sink, his arms ache, but he must cut more. Each blow of the axe echoes into the silence, each split log another heartbeat against the cold. His breath steams, sweat freezes on his collar, but still he swings. You stand beside him, your hands blistering at the handle, your body aching, but the pile slowly grows again. Inside, the mother tends the fire carefully, rationing heat like medicine. She adds only small sticks at a time, coaxing the flame rather than feeding it hungrily. The children huddle close, noses pink, hands extended. You smell the faint sweetness of pine resin, hear the crackle of sap, and for a moment, warmth returns. Yet danger lurks always. Logs damp with snow smoke heavily, choking the room. Sparks leap when resin ignites, threatening quilts hung too near. And outside, storms sometimes bury woodpiles completely, forcing families to dig with bare hands to free their own fuel. You imagine scraping snow from a frozen log, your fingers raw, desperate to feed the waiting stove. Oddly, settlers sometimes marked their woodpiles like monuments, stacking them carefully against walls or fences, measuring survival by the height of the stack. Children traced initials in the frost along them, as though signing their family's claim against the winter. You picture such a pile now, a small mountain glowing faintly with promise. Night returns. The woodpile shrinks again, logs burning down to glowing coals. The family gathers close, quilts drawn tight, breath visible in the dim. The father sighs, counting in silence the days until thaw, until green returns, until woodcutting is no longer a race against death. You hear the exhaustion in his breath, but also the resolve. Some historians argue that firewood shortages epitomize the frontier spirit. Endless work, endless scarcity, and endless will to endure anyway. Others view it as a reminder that nature set limits humans could never truly conquer. Both readings press against you now, as you feel the weight of an axe in your imagination, the ache of arms that cannot stop swinging. By morning, the pile has grown a little, though not enough. The father returns with fresh cuts, frost clinging to his beard. The mother stirs embers back to flame. Children clap their hands over the stove, cheeks pink, eyes hopeful. The cycle repeats. Chop, burn, ration, endure. Step back now. The cabin breathes smoke, wood smoke curling into the pale sky. Inside, warmth clings fragilely, bought log by log. Outside, the prairie stretches endless, trees rare, storms constant. Fire is life, wood its currency, and survival a ledger always on the edge of red. You pull the quilt closer, listening to the soft crackle, smelling pine and ash. The storm still waits, but for tonight the stove glows. For tonight the woodpile holds. The woodpile sighs in the corner, smaller than it should be, yet for now the fire holds steady. Still, as you look around the dim cabin, another truth presses close. Walls and warmth mean little without food. Bellies grumble louder than wind, and survival here was measured not only in logs but in larders. You turn toward the shelves where jars, sacks and barrels stand, shadows looming, each one the fragile memory of autumn harvest. One firmly recorded fact of frontier winters is that food had to be stored months ahead. Grain dried, corn shelled, vegetables pickled, meat salted or smoked. Without preservation, hunger stalked quickly. You imagine opening a barrel now, Inside lies salted pork, pale and greasy, its smell sharp with brine. Another sack holds cornmeal, gritty and dry, promising endless mush but little variety. Every item is precious, rationed with care, each spoonful a negotiation with winter's length. Curiously, diaries often mention the monotony of these meals. Children begged for something different, tired of cornmeal porridge and salt pork, yet their parents could offer nothing else. One letter tells of a boy dreaming of apples all winter, only to wake to another bowl of grey mush. You can almost taste it now, thick, bland, filling but joyless, sticking to your tongue like paste. Scholars continue to debate whether frontier diets were sufficient to sustain real health. Some insist preserved foods provided enough calories for survival. Others argue the lack of fresh produce led to scurvy, weakness, and illness. You sense both truths as you picture the family eating, bellies quieted, but bodies weary, longing for green that does not exist under snow. Step closer to the shelves. You see jars of pickled cucumbers, their brine cloudy, lids sealed with wax. A faint smell of vinegar leaks into the air, sharp and comforting. Next to them sit sacks of beans, hard as stones until boiled for hours. A crock of butter rests nearby, its surface darkened with salt. Each item whispers of summer labor, planting, harvesting, preserving. The work of one season stretches into the next, every bite a reminder of fields now buried under drifts. An unusual anecdote appears from one settler's journal. Families sometimes suspended meat from rafters to keep it away from mice. Imagine looking up and seeing hams swinging above your head, the smell of smoke clinging to them, while children swatted at dangling strips like piñatas. It was comical, but also necessary. The ceiling turned pantry to save what little remained. The soundscape is quieter here. The stove hums, the pot simmers, beans rattling faintly as they boil. A wooden spoon scrapes the bottom, the sound steady and rhythmic. Children murmur as bowls are passed, spoons clinking against tin. Outside, the storm moans, but inside the air smells of beans, salt, and faint vinegar. The meal is simple, but it fills the silence with comfort. Some historians view these stored foods as proof of ingenuity, the transformation of abundance into endurance. Others emphasize the fragility of it all. Jars could spoil, barrels could rot, mice could consume what humans saved. You run your fingers over the lid of a jar now, feeling the wax seal brittle, wondering if it will last another month. And then there were treats, rare but unforgettable. A jar of dried apples, leathery and sweet, brought out on nights when morale faltered. A handful of molasses candy, sticky and bright, lifted children's spirits like sunshine. Imagine unwrapping such a treasure in a world of salt and mush, its sweetness so startling it made you laugh aloud. One girl wrote she remembered the taste of one raisin for years. You let it melt on your tongue in imagination, savoring joy compressed into a single bite. An odd tidbit. Sometimes settlers resorted to eating coffee grounds boiled again and again until they were nothing but bitter sludge. Yet they clung to the ritual, sipping the dark liquid more for comfort than nourishment. You taste it now, acrid, smoky, but somehow steadying proof that civilization, however thin, still lingered in the bottom of a cup. The family eats in silence, spoons scraping bowls, steam rising. The mother doles portions carefully, measuring each ladle. The children slurp greedily, grateful even for bland mush. When the last bite is gone, bowls are wiped clean with scraps of bread, nothing wasted. Hunger is not sated fully, but it is quieted, and that is enough to endure another night. Scholars sometimes describe frontier food as edible time capsules, each jar and sack a memory of seasons past. Others see them as fragile promises, too easily lost to spoilage or theft. Both readings hang in the air as you stare at the shelves past abundance, frozen in glass, present hunger, pressing harder with every day. Later, as the storm howls outside, the family unwraps one last treat, a pie made of dried apples, crust brittle but fragrant. Its smell fills the cabin, sharp with spice. They cut it into thin slices, each piece savored slowly. For a brief moment, the blizzard fades, replaced by sweetness on the tongue, memory in the air. Night deepens. The shelves look emptier than before. A jar gone, a sack lighter. The fire still burns, but food dwindles with every meal. You pull the quilt around your shoulders, listening to the faint hiss of the pot, the slow scrape of spoons, the storm's steady voice beyond. Step back in your mind. The cabin is a storehouse as much as a shelter, its walls holding not only bodies, but the ghost of summer's harvest. Inside, hunger waits like another storm, one measured not in snow but in empty jars. And as you close your eyes, you feel it there too, the slow counting down of meals, the quiet knowledge that survival is not only about heat, but about what you can swallow, chew, and make last until the thaw. The shelves grow barer with each passing day, and though meals still simmer on the stove, a deeper unease creeps in. What happens when those shelves are empty? Hunger lurks like another wolf outside the door, patient, waiting. You feel it in the hush that falls after supper, when spoons are set down and eyes drift toward the corners where sacks and jars once stood full. The blizzard is not only a battle of cold, it is a war of appetite. One sobering reality recorded again and again is that frontier families often reach the edge of starvation during long winters. Diaries speak of rations dwindling to almost nothing, of meals stretched thin until they were little more than hot water flavored with scraps. Imagine holding a wooden bowl filled with broth made from a single bone, steam rising, yet no real nourishment in its depths. You sip anyway, because hope tastes like something, even if the belly remains hollow. Curiously, some families turn to foraging even in deep snow. They dug through drifts to find frozen turnips left behind in fields, scraped bark for edible inner layers, or boiled pine needles into a bitter, vitamin-rich tea. Picture kneeling in the snow, fingers numb, clawing at the frozen earth for a root that might taste of dirt but still mean survival. Researchers remain split on how common outright starvation was. Some argue settlers generally survived winters through planning and preservation. Others point to records of families wasting away, their letters filled with hollow words and desperate measures. As you sit near the stove now, your stomach tightening at the thought of emptiness, you sense the truth lies somewhere in the shadows. Not every family starved, but hunger was a constant, whispering presence. The sensory world shifts here. The pot on the stove no longer smells rich. It gives off only the faint aroma of boiled beans stretched too thin, of grease ladled sparingly. Bowls clink softly. Spoons scrape every last drop. Children lick the rims, eyes still wide with craving. Even the dog stares hungrily, ribs showing through its fur, tail wagging faintly at the smell of even crumbs. An unusual anecdote surfaces in one pioneer's memoir. A family claimed they boiled leather strips from harnesses, softening them into a kind of soup. The taste was foul, but it filled space in the belly. Imagine chewing on soggy leather, the flavor acrid, your teeth aching, yet swallowing because the alternative is worse. It feels absurd, even grotesque, but desperation has no dignity. Some scholars interpret these stories as exaggerations, shaped by memory and folklore. Others insist they reflect reality, evidence of how thin the line between survival and ruin truly was. You hold that debate in your chest as your own imagined hunger grows sharper, the air around you heavy with the absence of enough food. Listen closely. The storm rages still, but inside the cabin the only sounds are the crack of wood and the faint rumble of stomachs. A child whimpers quietly, asking for more. The mother strokes hair and whispers promises she may not keep. The father stares at the shelves, his face lined with worry. Each silence between breaths is louder than the blizzard outside. And then there are the stories of ingenuity. Families stretching flour by mixing it with ground corn husks. Women grinding acorns into flour, bitter but edible. Children sent to gather icicles, melted into weak tea flavored with the last bit of sugar. Imagine sipping such a drink. The sweetness faint but shocking after weeks of bland salt and starch. It is not enough, but it feels miraculous. An odd tidbit arises from letters. Some settlers traded recipes for survival foods, such as snow pancakes, flour mixed with melted snow, fried without eggs or milk. Thin, tasteless, but filling. You picture a mother flipping such cakes on a pan, the smell faintly charred, children cheering as if it were a feast. The debate among historians remains fierce. Were these starvation stories cautionary tales retold for drama, or accurate accounts of a reality too grim to romanticize? Either way, you feel their weight in the air now. Hunger scratches more persistently than wolves, gnaws more deeply than cold. It sits with you in the cabin, invisible yet undeniable. And yet, even in hunger, people found ways to hold on. A family gathers at the stove, breaking a single piece of bread into 6 parts. They chew slowly, savoring each crumb, eyes closing as though it were cake. A child giggles faintly, perhaps from delirium, perhaps from stubborn joy. You realize that survival was not only about filling stomachs, but about keeping spirits alive when the body faltered. Night falls, and the cabin is quiet. Bellies rumble, breath fogs, quilts weigh heavy, but no one speaks of despair. Instead, the father tells a story of spring, of seeds planted and fields green. The children fall asleep with visions of harvest in their heads, hunger temporarily quieted by hope. Oddly enough, later recollections show that many who endured such winters spoke of hunger, not with shame, but with grim pride. They told stories of what they endured as proof of their grit, badges of survival etched into memory. You feel that pride now, faint but steady, pulsing beneath the ache of emptiness. By dawn, the shelves are lighter still, a jar gone, a sack empty. The family eats sparingly, eyes watchful, counting days. The storm outside is relentless, but inside another storm grows, the storm of hollow stomachs and restless minds. And yet, somehow, the stove glows, the family rises, and another day begins. Step back in your mind. The cabin stands small against the endless white, smoke curling upward. Inside, hunger presses close, shaping every moment. But still, voices rise, children stir, parents endure. Even in famine's shadow, life persists, stubborn and fragile, waiting for thaw. The shelves stand nearly bare, hunger gnawing like a second storm inside the cabin. Yet not every family relied only on what they had put away. Some braved the blizzard itself, venturing out into the white world with rifles or traps in search of game. You feel the door creak open in your mind, icy wind knifing in as a man pulls his hat low, gun over his shoulder. The decision is risky, but without it the pot stays empty. One reliable fact from frontier accounts is that winter hunting was both dangerous and essential. Deer, rabbits, grouse, and prairie chickens could sometimes be found even in the worst weather. Tracks pressed into snow gave away their presence, and men followed those faint signs for miles. You picture yourself trudging after them, boots crunching, breath burning in your chest, the world reduced to whiteness and silence broken only by the crack of branches under weight. Curiously enough, some diaries describe how families set deadfall traps right outside the cabin door, catching rabbits lured by scraps of food. One child wrote of waking to the sound of a trap springing and finding breakfast waiting in the snow. Imagine lifting a trembling rabbit from such a snare, the relief sharp as hunger itself, though tempered by the grimness of the act. Scholars disagree about how reliable winter hunting truly was. Some argue it saved countless families, filling pots when shelves ran dry. Others point out that storms often drove game deep into cover, leaving traps empty and rifles useless. You feel both truths as you imagine waiting hours in the cold, eyes stinging, only to return empty-handed. The cabin welcomes you back, but hunger scolds you louder than the storm ever could. The sensory world of hunting is stark. The air outside is sharp, slicing your throat with every breath. Snow squeaks underfoot, dry and brittle. The forest smells faintly of pine and animal musk, a reminder that life still stirs here, hidden beneath branches and burrows. You hold your rifle tightly, its metal biting at your fingers, waiting for a flicker of motion against endless white. An unusual anecdote survives. One settler claimed to have shot a grouse that had buried itself in the snow to keep warm, startling both bird and hunter. The family dined on stew that night, feathers drifting like snowflakes around the cabin as children plucked it. You can almost smell the rich broth, thick with meat, rare enough to feel like luxury. Listen closely. A rifle cracks in the distance, echoing through trees. Dogs bark faintly, their voices muffled by drifts. Back at the cabin, children press ears to the window, waiting, anxious. Will the hunter return with food or empty hands? The tension is as thick as the storm. Some historians frame these hunts as heroic, testaments to human courage against nature. Others suggest they were desperate gambles, chances taken because nothing else remained. You weigh those perspectives as you walk deeper into the snow-laden woods. Rifle heavy, heart heavier. Heroism and desperation blur when your children wait hungry by the stove. Then comes the moment. A rabbit darts from underbrush. A deer flicks its tail in the distance. Your pulse leaps, breath quickens, rifle raises. The shot cracks, snow sprays, silence follows. Sometimes the aim is true, and you carry back meat heavy on your shoulder. Other times, you miss, and the silence is heavier still, pressing down as you trudge home empty, failure trailing you like frost. Inside the cabin, the difference is profound. When meat returns, the pot bubbles rich with stew, the smell filling every crack, children laughing as grease coats their lips. When none comes, supper is thin gruel again, silence broken only by spoons scraping bowls. You sit at the table in imagination, tasting both outcomes, the joy of fat broth and the despair of brothless water. Oddly, some families turned hunting into community. Neighbors shared meat when one caught more than needed, returning the favor later. But others guarded their kills fiercely, resenting mouths they could not feed. Imagine the tension when a neighbor knocks during famine, asking for a portion. Generosity collides with survival, kindness strained thin. An unusual tidbit. Settlers sometimes ate animals considered unthinkable today. Porcupine, crow, even skunk. Letters record the smells as nearly unbearable. But meat was meat. Picture yourself swallowing such stew, nose pinched, yet grateful for the warmth it spread through your belly. Hunger changes definitions quickly. The storm outside rages on. In your mind, you see the hunter finally return, boots heavy with ice, rifle across his back. He sets down a deer haunch with a thud, frost steaming from its hide. The children cheer. The mother weeps in relief. Knives flash, meat simmers, the cabin fills with aroma so rich it almost erases despair. You inhale deeply, warmth spreading, and feel life's grip tighten once more. Some scholars note that these moments of bounty, rare as they were, became legends retold for generations. Others caution against romanticizing, pointing out that for every successful hunt, another ended in loss. You stand between those interpretations now, tasting stew that feels miraculous while remembering the nights of empty bowls. Dawn comes pale and cruel. The hunter sharpens his knife again, preparing for another venture. Children scrape bones clean, dogs gnaw leftovers, and the shelves remain almost bare. Food from the storm's teeth is always temporary. Yet, for one night, the pot was full, and laughter returned. Step back now in your imagination. The cabin is no fortress, but inside, fire glows, stew simmers, and voices rise. Beyond the walls, snow stretches endless. Prey hides, predators circle. Survival here is not just about planning or storing. It is about braving the white silence, daring the storm to yield its meager offerings. And though hunger will return tomorrow, Tonight the family eats, and tonight, for a few hours, the storm is not master. The stew pot still lingers in your imagination, its steam thick and fragrant, but meat never lasts long in a cabin of hungry mouths. By the next day, scraps are gone, and the shelves look bare again. This is when families leaned hardest on the simplest, cheapest provisions of all their flour, cornmeal, and the strange flatbreads and biscuits that carried them through nights of emptiness. You shift closer to the stove now, watching as the mother lifts a pan, dusts it with meal, and begins to stir batter thin as water. One well-recorded fact is that frontier bread was rarely the golden yeasted loaf you might picture. Instead, it was often dense, flat, or gritty, made with sourdough starters that never truly died. These starters were precious, carried in jars from state to state, kept alive by feeding with flour and water. Some families traced theirs back generations, a bubbling mixture of wild yeast that could mean the difference between an empty table and a filling, if bland, meal. Imagine dipping your hand into a crock, the smell sour and alive, like vinegar crossed with earth. Curiously, settlers often improvised when even flour grew scarce. Cornmeal mush, sometimes called Johnny cake, was poured onto griddles and eaten with nothing more than salt. Other times, ash cakes were baked directly in the coals, dough wrapped in leaves or just slapped onto embers, scraped off later with bits of charcoal still clinging. Picture pulling one free, its crust blackened, its inside gummy, chewing through grit and smoke yet grateful for every bite. Historians still puzzle over whether these humble breads sustained settlers fully. Some say the calories were enough, dense fuel for endless work. Others argue malnutrition was inevitable, without variety bellies filled, but bodies weakened. You taste the contradiction as you chew the imagined ash cake now, stomach steadied, spirit unfulfilled. The soundscape of bread making is simple but steady. The scrape of a wooden spoon against a tin bowl, the hiss of dough hitting hot iron, the soft puff of flour as it settles on rough boards. Children hover nearby, noses twitching, eyes following every motion. They are hungry not for delicacy but for something warm, something to chew in the long hours. An unusual anecdote comes from a settler's letter. A family mixed their flour with grated, dried pumpkin, stretching it further and giving bread a strange sweetness. They laughed that it tasted like pumpkin glue, but ate it anyway, grateful. Imagine biting into such a loaf, the texture odd, the flavor faintly sweet, a reminder of harvest even in midwinter. Step closer, in imagination. The mother flips a corn cake onto a tin plate, steam rising, edges crisp, but middle heavy. The children grab eagerly, fingers burning, mouths chewing too fast. Crumbs scatter across quilts, caught quickly before they vanish. You chew along with them, jaw aching slightly at the density, but warmth blooming slowly from the inside. Some researchers interpret these crude breads as symbols of adaptation, the transformation of scarcity into survival. Others note how monotonous diets gnawed at morale, bread becoming less a comfort than a chore. Both readings linger as you sit at the table, chewing slowly, trying to taste gratitude through fatigue. An odd tidbit: when settlers did have molasses or honey, they sometimes spread it thinly on bread as if it were treasure. A single spoonful stretched across a week, each drop licked clean. Imagine your tongue chasing the last sweet trace on a plate, the joy of sugar as powerful as any feast. The sensory details weigh heavily. Bread smells faintly of smoke, a bitterness clinging from coals. The texture is coarse, sometimes grainy, sometimes sticky. Your teeth grind against grit, flour poorly sifted, yet there is warmth in your belly afterward, and that is enough to hush despair for a few hours. Listen. The fire crackles, the pan hisses, children laugh faintly with mouths full. Outside the storm mutters, but indoors the bread is victory. Thin, bland, blackened, it doesn't matter. It is proof that there is still something left to eat. Some historians suggest bread was less about nourishment and more about ritual, anchoring families in the rhythm of meals even when food was scarce. Others see it as a bare survival measure, proof of desperation. You sit with both views as you imagine breaking a loaf in half, handing it to a child, watching their eyes light even at the smallest gift. As night deepens, more dough is mixed and poured into the pan, repeating endlessly. Children fall asleep with crumbs on their lips, the smell of flour in their hair. The mother wipes the bowl clean, leaving nothing wasted. The fire burns lower, but bellies are lined with dense bread, buying one more night of endurance. Oddly enough, some diaries recall children pretending ash cakes were fancy pies, naming them after fruits they'd never seen that year. Apple pie, one girl giggled, chewing blackened crust. The family laughed with her, humor seasoning the meal more than any spice. You can almost hear that laughter now, a spark against the storm. Morning comes pale and hard. The cornmeal sack is lighter, the flour crock nearly empty. Still, another round of cakes is mixed, another day's hunger delayed. The family chews, works, sleeps, and repeats. The cycle feels endless, but so does their will. Step back in your mind. The cabin smells of smoke and bread, its walls steeped in grit and grease. Shelves are sparse, sacks half empty, yet still the pan hisses, still the fire glows, still hands reach for one more cake. On the frozen prairie, survival is not feasts, it is small, stubborn meals that keep hearts beating. Tonight, bread is enough. The pan cools on the stove, its surface blackened with the memory of ash cakes. But even as bellies rest heavy with bread, another worry creeps into the small cabin. Warmth and food mean little if sickness slips in. In these close quarters, where air is thick with smoke and damp hangs in every quilt, illness spreads as silently as snow itself. You lean back, quilt pulled closer, and listen as a cough rattles through the room, sharp and lingering. One undeniable truth of frontier life is that medicine was scarce and unreliable. Families carried small tins of salves or bottles of patent medicine, but when blizzards sealed them in, they had only home remedies to rely on. You imagine a mother dipping a cloth into vinegar to cool a fever, or steeping pine needles in hot water to ease a cough. The smell rises in your mind sharp, resinous, both comforting and bitter. Curiously, some settlers swore by onion poultices, pressing hot slices against chests to draw out sickness. Others smeared goose grease on skin, believing it would cure chills. Picture lying under a quilt with your chest sticky and pungent, children wrinkling noses, yet trusting it might keep you alive. It is both comic and tragic, yet such improvisations often meant survival. Researchers disagree on how effective these folk cures were. Some argue pine needle teas provided enough vitamin C to ward off scurvy, saving many from collapse. Others insist most remedies were more hope than help, their real power lying in the comfort they offered. You feel both perspectives as you sip an imagined bitter tea, warmth spreading through your throat, even if healing remains uncertain. The sensory atmosphere deepens. The cabin smells of damp wool, vinegar, grease, and smoke. The air feels heavy, every breath thick with humidity from steaming kettles. Quilts rustle as children turn in restless sleep, their cheeks flushed with fever, their small coughs echoing. You press a hand to a forehead, skin hot and clammy, the contrast startling in this world of frost. An unusual anecdote emerges in letters. One mother described placing hot bricks wrapped in cloth at her children's feet, changing them through the night, swearing they drew fever away. Another claimed melted snow mixed with molasses was the only medicine her family had. Sweet comfort for bitter throats. Imagine sipping such syrup, cloying but soothing, your body relaxing if only from the warmth. Listen carefully. A child coughs again, deep and harsh. The mother hums softly, rocking them, her voice weary but steady. The stove hisses, kettle bubbling. Outside, the storm moans faintly, as though joining the chorus of sickness. The world is not quiet here. It is filled with small, fragile sounds of human struggle. Some historians interpret these improvised medicines as testaments to resilience, proof that settlers found healing in whatever nature offered. Others argue they highlight the vulnerability of those who ventured into lands without proper medical support. You sense both readings as you watch a family press onion poultices to their chests, desperate, inventive, vulnerable. Step closer in imagination. A small shelf holds jars, dried herbs, animal fat, roots wrapped in cloth. Each one smells faint, musty, but holds promise. Hands reach for them with reverence, treating them like talismans. You can almost hear the whispered prayers that accompany each remedy, half medicine, half faith. Oddly, settlers sometimes turned to storytelling itself as medicine. A child, sick with fever, was told tales of spring and flowers. Their mind lifted from pain even as their body ached. One diary recalls a boy calming after hearing of green grass, his breathing easing as though imagination itself soothed him. You can see it now. Words as balm, hope as cure. The risks remained constant. A simple cough could turn to pneumonia. A small cut could fester without antiseptic. Frostbite could blacken fingers until they were useless. Families faced these threats daily, whispering prayers each time someone sneezed, each time a child wheezed in the night. You hear those whispers now, low and urgent beneath the roar of the storm. Some scholars suggest that illness defined the frontier as much as hunger or cold. Others caution that we overemphasize it, forgetting how many survived through sheer luck and toughness. Either way, you feel the weight of frailty pressing against the walls, every cough a reminder that survival was never guaranteed. Night deepens, candles burn low, the sick child sleeps at last, breath shallow but steady. The mother slumps against the wall, eyes closed, whispering thanks. The air smells faintly of onion and pine, acrid yet soothing. You pull your quilt tighter, realizing that remedies here are not about certainty but about trying, about doing something in the face of helplessness. An odd tidbit. One letter recalled settlers melting snow for steam inhalation, covering heads with quilts to trap the vapor. Children giggled at the spectacle even as their eyes watered. The absurd ritual, both treatment and entertainment. You smile faintly, picturing small faces peeking from quilts, coughing, yet laughing. By morning, the fever has eased. The child stirs, cheeks pale but cooler. The family breathes relief, their remedies credited, though no one can prove if they worked. The stove burns on, the storm sighs, and life continues, fragile and persistent. Step back in your mind. The cabin is no hospital, but inside it, onion, pine, vinegar, and goose grease have stood against death. Some cures may have been useless, some miraculous, but all carried faith. And sometimes, faith alone was enough to see another dawn. The scent of onions and pine lingers faintly in the air, but with sickness held at bay for now, another danger gnaws at the cabin from the inside. Boredom. Days stretch long, storms stretch longer, and when every chore is done, silence presses heavy. Too much silence breeds restlessness, frayed tempers, and the creeping madness settlers later called cabin fever. You sit with them now, quilt wrapped around your shoulders, and feel the tension rising like frost on the walls. One well-documented observation is that isolation during prairie winters drove some families nearly mad. Letters describe quarrels erupting over trifles: who tended the fire last, who wasted flour, whose snore rattled loudest. Confined in one room for weeks, with no fresh air and little light, the mind turned inward, chasing shadows. Imagine staring at the same paper-paned window for 40 days, the outside world erased, your reflection blurred in the greasy glow. Curiously, some settlers devised rituals to fight this creeping despair. Families scheduled tasks or games, dividing hours into segments so time wouldn't dissolve. One diary records a father declaring story hour each evening, insisting everyone tell something, even if nonsense, just to keep spirits moving. Picture yourself trying to invent a tale while snow piles against the door, words stammering out, not because they're clever, but because silence feels more dangerous. Scholars continue to argue about whether cabin fever was more psychological or physical. Was it the isolation itself, or the poor light, bad air, and endless monotony of diet that worsened the mind? You feel both answers circling as you glance at the restless figures under quilts, their eyes too bright, their voices too sharp. The sensory details weigh heavily. The air is thick, stale with smoke and sweat. Quilts smell damp, clothes unwashed. Shadows flicker endlessly, stretching and shrinking with every candle flame. Children fidget, adults pace, dogs whine at the door. The storm outside is loud, but inside the cabin the tension is louder still, even when no one speaks. An unusual anecdote appears from a settler's recollection. One man painted checkerboards directly onto the cabin table, carving pieces from corn cobs. His family played for hours, even betting chores on each match. It did not erase hunger or cold, but it gave the mind something to grip. Imagine leaning over that table now, fingers brushing rough corn pieces, your laughter sharp and sudden as you steal a victory. Listen carefully. Someone hums, off-key, just to fill the air. A child taps spoons together, clack, 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 until their sister yells for quiet. The mother sighs, the father grumbles, and tension sharpens. Words break out accusations, complaints, silly arguments flaring into loud quarrels. Then silence falls again, thicker than before, each heart heavier with regret. You hear it all, feel it pressing on your chest. Some historians interpret these storms of emotion as evidence that humans are not made for confinement, that wilderness outside was less harsh than the wilderness inside minds. Others suggest such quarrels were natural and even necessary, a way to release pressure before it exploded. You consider both as you watch a family scowl in silence, only to laugh again an hour later over a silly riddle. Oddly, settlers sometimes marked the passage of endless days by scratching tallies into logs, lines carved one after another, counting storms, counting nights, counting sanity itself. Imagine running your fingers over such marks, each groove a reminder that time has passed, even if every day felt the same. To fight despair, small joys became lifelines. Someone finds a deck of cards, edges soft and bent, and games stretch into hours. Children invent riddles, laugh at nonsense rhymes, pretend their shadows on the wall are animals. The dog, restless, chases its own tail while children giggle. For a moment, laughter breaks through, brittle but real. You smile with them, the air lighter though the storm outside hasn't eased. The sensory contrast is sharp. Smoke stings your eyes, but laughter sweetens your ears. Bread tastes bland, but games spice the silence. The cabin feels small, walls pressing inward, yet also warm, with life stubbornly refusing to collapse. You realize survival is not only in the body but in the spirit, stretched taut yet unbroken. An odd tidbit from folklore suggests settlers believed that whistling indoors during storms invited bad luck, and so silence sometimes lingered longer than it should, fear mixing with superstition. Picture a child about to whistle a tune, silenced by a sharp gesture, the room hushed, as though even joy might anger the storm. Some scholars suggest these rituals of games, songs, even silence were what distinguished families who endured from those who broke. Others argue that chance alone decided. Either way, you feel the truth in the air now. Survival is as much about the mind's endurance as the body's. Night drags on. Candles burn low. Shadows climb higher. Children toss and turn, whispering silly secrets to stave off fear. Parents lie awake, listening to the storm, listening also to their own thoughts pressing hard against the walls of the mind. You lie with them, eyes open, sensing the fragility of patience, the way despair can creep like frost along rafters. And yet, when dawn comes pale and grey, the cabin still hums with life. Quarrels fade, laughter returns, chores resume. Tallies are carved deeper into the logs. Another day endured, another step further into winter's endless march. Step back in your mind. The cabin is a fragile box of wood and cloth, pressed by snow outside and silence inside. Yet voices still rise, games still play, laughter still sparks. Cabin fever hovers, but it has not broken them. Survival, you realize, is not only about fire and food. It is about keeping the heart from freezing, even when the walls of the mind turn as narrow as the walls of the house. The walls are still etched with tallies, shadows from the candle still dance, and you can almost feel the air turning heavy again. But now another kind of tension creeps into the cabin, not from silence, but from sound. For even when storms keep families snowbound, they are rarely alone. Beyond those thin log walls, other lives stir in the white wilderness, and the blizzard often carried not just cold but visitors some welcome, others far from it. One firmly attested reality was that neighbors sometimes appeared suddenly during storms, desperate for shelter. Prairie cabins, small as they were, became havens for travelers or neighbors stranded halfway home. Diaries record whole families crowding into single-room shelters, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, breath clouding the already thick air. Imagine lying down under your quilt, only to find 3 strangers sleeping at your feet, boots steaming, faces pale with exhaustion. Curiously, not all visitors walked on 2 legs. Wolves, drawn by livestock smells, circled close, their howls carrying through the night until every child shivered. Some families wrote of pounding on the door as if by human hand, only to find a wolf clawing at the latch. You can almost hear it now, claws scratching, breath hot against the crack, growl low and hungry, mingling with the wind. Historians continue to discuss whether these wolf encounters were as common as folklore suggests. Some argue journals exaggerate the menace, turning a rare threat into constant fear. Others insist the predator's presence was real and pressing, especially in years when game was scarce. Listening to the storm now, you can't quite decide which is truer legend or memory, but either way, the fear remains sharp in the imagination. The sensory world of these encounters is vivid. The air inside grows hot with too many bodies crowded close, breath-dampening quilts, the smell of sweat and damp wool mixing with smoke. Meanwhile, outside, the air is sharp and metallic with cold, howls drifting eerie across the snow. Every sound carries meaning: the creak of the latch, the scrape of claws, the sudden thud of boots as a desperate neighbor collapses into the cabin. An unusual anecdote surfaces from one settler's letter. On one bitter night, a horse forced its way into a cabin through the door, panicked and half frozen, knocking over the stove before it could be calmed. Imagine the chaos: smoke, sparks, children screaming, the animal's body steaming as it shivered inside, filling the space with the smell of sweat and frost. For hours the family sat wide-eyed, unable to move around the enormous intruder that had become their reluctant guest. Listen closely. The knock at the door is hesitant, muffled by snow, followed by a faint voice calling for help. The father hesitates, hand on the latch, torn between charity and caution. Opening that door means letting in not just people but wind, cold, and maybe worse. Still, at last the latch lifts, and a figure stumbles in, eyes wide with gratitude, body half frozen. Quilts are thrown over shoulders, hot broth pressed into shaking hands. Relief fills the room, but so does tension: more mouths to feed, more bodies to crowd the fragile space. Some scholars see these episodes of sudden company as proof of community spirit on the frontier, neighbors banding together in storms. Others emphasize the strain: resources stretched thinner, tempers sharper. You feel both perspectives clashing in the cramped cabin now, voices overlapping, warmth shared but uneasily. Oddly, children sometimes loved these intrusions. A neighbor's arrival meant new stories, perhaps even treats from another household. One diary recalls a boy bursting with excitement when a traveler shared peppermint candies from his pocket, the sharp sweetness shocking in a winter of bland porridge. You taste it now, the mint burning cool in your mouth, a fleeting miracle brought by chance. And then, of course, there were less human intrusions. Mice and rats multiplied in warm cabins, gnawing at stores, scurrying across sleeping forms at night. A mother once wrote of waking to find a mouse curled in her bonnet for warmth. You can feel the shudder and the laugh mingling in her words, revulsion softened by absurdity. The storm pressed everyone close, even the smallest invaders. The cabin becomes a stage of constant interruption. One night, a wolf's howl freezes everyone in silence. Another night, a knock brings neighbors in, their faces ghostly pale. Another morning, footprints around the barn reveal that something circled all night long, watching. Each sound outside is magnified, every scratch, every creak a question. Is it friend, foe, or merely the wind? Some researchers frame this constant vigilance as central to frontier psychology, never truly alone, never truly safe. Others insist it created bonds, humans and animals, neighbors and strangers, all part of the same storm-driven web. You sense the truth lies in both. Fear and fellowship knotted together in the howling dark. Night deepens again. The cabin is full, strangers huddled on the floor, children asleep against neighbors' knees. The stove glows, its warmth shared among too many bodies, yet gratitude hums in the air. Beyond the walls, wolves pad silently, breath misting, eyes watching. The storm blurs everything into one great chorus: wind, howls, snores, coughing, laughter. You lie in your quilt, listening to it all, realizing that survival is never solitary. An odd tidbit from later folklore recalls that families sometimes told children wolves could only approach if the fire burned low. Whether true or not, the lessons stuck keep the flame alive. And so fathers doze lightly, rising again and again to feed the stove, while mothers whisper to children that the fire keeps monsters away. You glance at the glowing embers and feel the truth in their superstition. Dawn finally breaks. Neighbors rise stiffly, thanking the hosts, trudging back into the snow. The cabin feels larger after their departure, though emptier too. The shelves are lighter, the fire weaker, but the bond of shared survival lingers. Outside, wolf tracks circle faintly, half filled with snow, reminders of the visitors who came uninvited. Step back now in your imagination. The cabin is more than a shelter. It is a stage where strangers, neighbors, animals and storms all play their parts. Inside, warmth is shared uneasily but gratefully. Outside, predators wait, silent and patient. And through it all, the family survives, weaving company and threat alike into their long winter story. The neighbors have gone, the wolves have faded back into the trees, and for a brief spell the cabin feels almost calm again. Yet quiet does not mean safety. In fact, the greatest danger of all might be the storm's silence after rage. Snow drifts pile high against the walls, pressing, smothering, trapping families inside until even the thought of opening the door feels impossible. You imagine standing at the threshold, hand on the latch, only to find the door won't budge at all. One thoroughly documented hazard of frontier winters was snow so deep it sealed cabins entirely. Letters describe roofs creaking under tons of weight, windows buried, doors frozen shut. Families lit candles at midday because no daylight entered, their world reduced to one dim, smoky room. Imagine waking to a blue-tinged darkness, realizing you are inside a snow cave more than a house, the air damp and heavy with every breath. Curiously, some settlers turned this entombment into advantage. Walls of snow pressed tight against logs could act like insulation, holding heat in and muffling the howls outside. One woman wrote that the silence inside was so complete she could hear her children's hearts beating as they slept. You feel it now, the muffled world, quiet as a blanket, though edged with fear that rescue might never come. Scholars debate whether such snowbound episodes were more protective than perilous. Some insist cabins became warmer, almost cozy cocoons. Others point to accounts of suffocation, roofs collapsing, or livestock starving in buried barns. As you run your hand over the frosted logs, You sense both truths: safety wrapped inside danger, comfort wrapped inside dread. The sensory landscape is eerie. The air tastes wet and metallic, every inhale thick. Candles flicker weakly, their flames bent by drafts creeping through cracks. The stove glows red, but its smoke struggles upward, chimney choked by snow, filling the cabin with haze. You cough, eyes stinging, hearing the rasp of other lungs fighting the same fight. An unusual anecdote from one diary tells of a family forced to dig a tunnel out through their chimney after drifts sealed the door. They crawled upward into daylight, emerging like moles from earth, their laughter tinged with panic. Picture yourself pushing through damp snow, light blinding as you burst free, lungs gulping air sharp and icy, relief filling every nerve. Listen carefully. Snow shifts and groans against the roof. A log creaks under pressure. Somewhere above, a muffled thud tells you part of the drift has slid. Inside, a child whimpers, clutching their blanket, whispering that the world has disappeared. The mother hushes them, stroking hair, her own eyes darting toward the ceiling. The silence presses harder than the storm ever did. Some researchers argue that psychological strain of being sealed in was worse than the physical risk. No sense of time, no sight of horizon, only endless shadow. Others point to the practicality. Snowbound cabins often did survive storms better, protected from wind. You weigh these perspectives as you sit under the dim candle, your chest tight with claustrophobia. Oddly enough, families sometimes decorated their snow caves with drawings on frosted walls, children tracing shapes with fingertips just to pass the time. A diary recalls stars and trees sketched in ice, tiny rebellions against the endless white. You picture them now, small hands carving galaxies into frost, imagination punching tiny holes in the darkness. The daily rhythm changes under snow. Wood must be rationed carefully. Each log burned means a smoky room, yet without it the cold creeps in fast. Food dwindles quicker. With no door to open, hunting and foraging are impossible. Even water requires melting snow dragged through the chimney or scooped from cracks. Every task shrinks to repetition. Stoke fire, melt snow, soothe children, repeat. The air smells of tallow smoke and wet wool, thick enough to taste. The walls drip faintly as snow presses warm from inside, melting at edges. Your skin prickles with damp, your hair clings to your neck. Even quilts feel clammy, no longer crisp, but heavy with moisture. The storm outside has not gone. It has simply moved inside with you. An odd tidbit: one family recorded playing burial games with children, pretending they were safe underground like hibernating animals. They compared themselves to bears in dens, rabbits in burrows, teaching little ones to see the snow not as coffin but cocoon. You hear their giggles faintly now, their innocence cutting through the parents' dread. Night inside a snowbound cabin is uncanny. No wind howls, no wolves call. The silence is total, broken only by the snap of firewood and the shift of snow above. Sleep feels uneasy, every creak overhead a threat. You lie with them, listening for collapse, lungs tightening in the smoke, wondering if morning light will ever return. Some historians describe these episodes as proof of human adaptability, finding safety even in burial. Others caution that such moments show the razor-thin margin settlers walked, one bad drift away from suffocation. You feel both judgments pressing on your ribs as you breathe shallowly, sharing air with too many bodies in too little space. And yet, dawn does come. Pale light seeps weakly through a crack above, snow glowing faintly blue. The father claws at the door, pushing until it yields just enough. A rush of fresh air floods in, sharp, painful, sweet. Children gasp, laughing as though reborn. The cabin exhales too, smoke clearing, walls dripping less heavily. For a moment, the world feels possible again. Step back in your mind. The cabin is half buried, smoke curling weakly from a chimney hole. Around it, drifts rise higher than the roofline, the prairie erased. But inside, Life still flickers, candles, fire, breath, laughter. Snow may have smothered the house, but not the spirit within. And as you close your eyes, you realize that survival often meant living as if entombed, waiting patiently, stubbornly, until the storm itself gave way. The snowdrifts have loosened, the air has cleared, and for the first time in weeks, the horizon glows faintly with the promise of change. You imagine stepping outside, boots crunching through a crust of ice, lungs filling with sharp air that feels almost sweet compared to the damp smoke of the cabin. The storm has not won, not yet. The family inside has endured through wood and bread, through sickness and hunger, through silence and songs. And now, as you lean against the frosted logs, you can almost hear the earth beginning to breathe again. One well-documented reality of frontier life was that winters did not last forever. The deadliest blizzards broke eventually, and though snow lingered, skies brightened. Let us speak of the first day sun shone through papered windows, filling rooms with dazzling light that made eyes ache and hearts leap. Imagine pulling the quilt from your shoulders, squinting into a brightness so strong it seemed like a miracle. Curiously, settlers often marked this first light with small celebrations: a piece of candy unwrapped, a song sung louder, a story told with extra laughter. One diary mentions a family baking their last bit of flour into pancakes, declaring them victory cakes to honor the storm's passing. You can almost taste them now, burnt, bland, yet carrying the flavor of triumph. Researchers debate how much relief these early thaws truly brought. Some argue they marked the turning point, hope solidified. Others insist dangers remained: frost, hunger, illness still lurking in the weeks ahead. Both views feel true as you stand at the threshold. The storm has broken, but the struggle is not yet over. The sensory shift is striking. Instead of the muffled hush of snowbound silence, the world now rings with dripping. Icicles shatter from eaves, water trickles along walls, the earth groans under thaw. The air smells wet, raw, alive again. Your skin tingles as sunlight brushes your cheeks, a sensation forgotten in endless grey. An unusual anecdote comes from a settler's letter. Children raced outside barefoot on the first thaw, dancing in puddles until their mother dragged them back in, furious and terrified they'd fall sick. Yet she admitted their laughter was the sweetest she'd heard in months. You picture their muddy toes, their squeals echoing against melting drifts, defiant joy flooding the prairie. Listen carefully. The wind has softened, no longer howling but sighing. Birds call faintly, crows first, then sparrows. A dog barks at nothing in particular, simply alive enough to make noise. Inside, the stove still ticks, but less desperately now. People lean against the walls, exhausted, smiling faintly, murmuring about spring. The house no longer feels like a prison. It feels like a survivor. Some scholars argue that this moment of relief was the true test, when families decided whether to stay another year or give up the frontier dream altogether. Others insist that once one winter was endured, families became rooted, unwilling to abandon what they had suffered so much to keep. You can sense both truths in the air now, as the cabin exhales with the snowmelt. Oddly, many recollections dwell on the smell of earth at thaw. After months of frozen air, the first whiff of damp soil felt intoxicating, almost holy. Imagine kneeling by a patch of ground where snow has melted, inhaling deeply, eyes stinging with tears, your heart aching with gratitude for dirt itself. The family steps outside in your imagination. The father stands tall, face to the sun, his beard dripping with meltwater. The mother closes her eyes, hands open as if catching blessings. The children laugh, pelting each other with the last clumps of snow. Their joy is raw, reckless, a release of months of fear. You watch them and feel it too, a loosening, a widening, a return of breath. The hardships of the winter do not vanish. The shelves are nearly empty, woodpile low, bodies weakened. But the storm has broken, and with it comes the certainty that survival was not in vain. You see scars, chapped hands, hollow cheeks, lines etched deeper around eyes, but also strength that glows beneath them. Some historians see these moments as the birth of frontier myth, tales later told of endurance and grit. Others caution that memory softened the misery, reshaping pain into legend. You weigh both, knowing that truth lies between. The suffering was real, and so was the pride of outlasting it. Night comes again, but now stars gleam sharp above the thawing land. The cabin glows warmly, not with desperation but with relief. Inside, voices murmur low, laughter breaks softly, sleep comes easier. You pull your quilt close, not in fear but in peace, listening to the drip of melting snow as lullaby. Step back now. The cabin stands against the prairie, scarred but upright. Around it, snow recedes slowly, revealing earth that will bloom again. Inside, a family rests, alive because they built, endured, believed. The storm has passed, but the memory will never fade. You close your eyes with them, heart heavy with respect, lungs full of thawing air. And now, the story softens, like snow melting beneath a kinder Sunday. You have walked with them through storms, felt the sting of frost on your cheeks, smelled the smoke and vinegar, tasted ash cakes and salted pork. You have heard the coughs in the night, the laughter over games, the sighs of despair and relief. And here you are, still wrapped in the quiet of survival, listening to the steady breath of a family who endured. The storm has ended, but in your mind, you linger. The cabin walls are no longer closing in, they are simply shelter, simple wood that stood firm when the world roared. Outside, the prairie stretches vast and white, but now its silence is gentle, its winds softened. The wolves are gone, the shelves nearly empty, but the fire glows still, embers steady, casting shadows that flicker like promises. Your breathing slows with theirs, your shoulders soften as if wrapped in their quilts. Each sound fades, the crackle of the stove, the faint drip of thawing icicles, the sigh of wind along the roof. It all settles into a hush, a cradle of calm, where nothing urgent remains. You picture stars above, endless and kind, spreading their light across the prairie. You picture fields waiting patiently under snow, seeds asleep but not gone, spring certain to come. And you picture the family resting deeply, bodies heavy with earned peace, dreams carrying them into warmer days. So let your own eyes close now. Let your breath deepen. Let your thoughts slow. The storm has passed. The cabin is safe, and you are safe too. Drift gently, as if wrapped in quilts of smoke and wool, drifting toward dreams where winter's edge melts into spring's quiet promise.